Please take your seats. The meeting is about to begin. Remember to speak into the microphone, as this meeting is being recorded for public record. Please stand by. We are going on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon and welcome to the December 17th meeting of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee. Today's meeting of the Land Use Committee will be conducted in a hybrid format with members of the committee physically present in the commission chambers at Miami Beach City Hall and staff and members of the public appearing either in person or virtually via Zoom. To participate virtually, members of the public may dial 888-475-4499 and enter the webinar ID, which is 8505-9923-037#, or log into the Zoom app and enter the webinar ID, which again is 8505-9923-037. Anyone wishing to speak on an item must click the raise hand icon in the Zoom app or dial *9 if participating by phone. With that, Mr. Director, we have an agenda for today's meeting. Are there any withdrawal, deferrals, changes to the agenda as printed?
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Chair, no.
With that, is there a motion to set the agenda? Is there a motion to set the agenda? The agenda's been moved and second. By acclamation, we can show the agenda as adopted. With that, Mr. Director, let's call item number 1.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 1 is understory requirements in single-family districts.
All right, Commissioner Suarez, this is your item. You're welcome to introduce your item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. PJ, can we start the slideshow, please? Okay, so I believe where we're at is a second stop before second reading to discuss understories, and I think we could have a longer, robust discussion on why I believe, and I agree with our planning director on understories as a superior home for South Florida, especially living on a barrier island. We just have to look at history, and we have to look at the hurricanes that have come to Florida. And you can realize that basically any home that was built on stilts, or aka an understory, survived the catastrophe, survived the storm surge. Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ian, any home that was built on stilts or an understory greatly survived the impact than houses built on a mound, or what we call an elevated berm. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the pictures in Florida of where homes that were built with understories survived, and you can see that that I see 5 there. All the homes that were newly constructed on stilts survived that catastrophic storm surge, and I believe this was Milton. Next slide, please. Here's another clear example. What you're looking at in the middle is a canal, and that is the home of a house that was not built on an understory or stilts. And that's literally washing away in the canal, while the homes that you see there are built on stilts and are still standing, obviously. Next slide, please. Here is a continuation of that same picture. Next slide. And so you can also see here that the house on the left, which is just completely destroyed, that's not on an understory, and the home on the right side is with an understory. And that just shows that basically you can be in proximity to one house that has that's not built for sustainability and another that is, and a picture's worth 1,000 words here. Next slide, PJ. There's some more examples, and I'm taking examples from different hurricanes in different years, so this is not just one particular instance. Next slide. So these are some of the articles that have recently come out. This was October 12th of this year. On one Gulf Coast street flooded by Milton, benefits of elevated homes stand out. And here is a perfect clear view, and this is an understory, as you can see, that they are able to survive these ever-increasing catastrophic storms that are going to be hitting Florida for the next foreseeable future. Next slide. In fact, it's getting to the point where we're actually at risk of losing flood insurance. And, you know, look, when we plan for the future, I think it's, as far as us up here, I think we need to take into account that the policies we put forward are for the future. And when I see, you know, articles like this and insurance providers just dropping out of Florida, I mean, that's a huge cause for concern. And everything that we can do to incentivize a more resilient Miami Beach, I think should be championed. So let's go to the next slide. So another one, you know, this is all Miami Herald, by the way. They're asking the question, are cities going to build higher for these catastrophic storm surges? You know, recently we've had a string of hurricanes that have plagued the West Coast. It's only a matter of time before they start coming to the East Coast, and it will come. And I think we need to prepare for that. Next slide. Okay, so as I explained earlier, right now, if you were to build a home, a single family home, and you wanted to build it on an elevated berm, you don't have to go to DRB. And you have no oversight whatsoever on anything that has to do with the home. But if you wanted to build it on an understory, you have to go to DRB. And so what I want to go over real quick is the problems with houses built on berms. So over time, berms can degrade, because at the end of the day, it's just basically sand, it's dirt. They lose their structural integrity. They become ineffective due to changing flood patterns. So for example, just this year, we've had 2 back-to-back 100-year storms. I mean, imagine that. So, you know, I think that's something to consider. If you don't mind, I don't think any of my colleagues are paying attention to me.
I am.
Okay. Well, Tanya?
Sorry, I was asking a question about something.
Okay. Well, the 2 of you are on your phone, and one of you is not even listening. And this is for you guys. This is not for anyone else.
Excuse me, Commissioner. You're recognized to present your item. We all listening to you. But if I'm gonna get a text message on my phone, I will respond to the text message. We are listening to you, but we're all also doing other things.
Okay, can you please
So
go back?
I ask you to please be considerate of your colleagues, because yes, we are all listening to you. Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you. So community level impact. So when multiple properties use berms, they collectively alter the floodplain dynamics. So for example, when FEMA comes in and they do the floodplains, we're changing that. A single family home changes the floodplain when you build on an elevated berm. And that gives potential increase of risk for flooding for your neighbors that aren't built higher. Regulatory and insurance challenges. Berms may not meet modern floodplain management requirements set by FEMA or local governments. Homes on berms may also face higher flood insurance premiums compared to stilted homes due to their high risk profile. Next slide, please. Okay, so the environmental impact. You're basically disrupting the natural composition of Miami Beach. You know, berms can block natural water flow patterns, leading to alternate drainage systems and increased water pooling in surrounding areas. So, you know, one of the issues and one of the, I guess, the arguments are going to be made is, well, when you build it on an elevated berm, we have certain criteria that has to be met to contain the water. And what I'm going to, the next slide I'm going to show you, or a couple slides, is even with retaining walls, there's still a risk of flooding your neighbor. So if you can go to the next slide. Flooding, so increased risk for neighbors, like I said. So when you build an elevated berm, naturally the water goes downward and it can flood into your neighbor's yard. It can also flood into the public right-of-way. And then there's ponding, and then there's, again, limited protection against storm surge. Next slide. So high cost, building a berm requires significant amounts of fill material and labor, making it expensive compared to stilt homes and construction. In fact, all the fill that we get comes from the Everglades. I'm not sure if everyone knows that. And, you know, we're taking fill from the Everglades, putting it on a truck, and we're delivering it here. And over time, it erodes. There's a potential for failure. A lot of them are, like I said, prone to erosion. And then you need to have regular maintenance for berms as opposed to it being on stilts or an understory. Next slide. Okay, so PJ, I don't know if you could play the video, right? But here on the left is a home that was built as a spec home, and it was built with an elevated berm. And during just a regular rainstorm, this isn't one of the floods that we had. It is actually leaking into the property next door. Okay, and this was a minimum requirement for the elevated berms for containing the water management. Next slide. Okay, so there's been a lot of misinformation surrounding this. There's been like a website that has been dedicated to this. It says, you know, Protect Miami Beach Design Review for Understory Homes. I'm sure Seraldo is going to be speaking. I mean, he says that this is a developer proposed project. You know, in fact, believe it or not, all of our items, we have to check off if this was a developer requested project. This is not a developer requested project. I specifically made sure that it's not. This is coming from me meeting with residents and then telling me that I have to, there's one case, one guy is going through 5 years of DRB approval. 5 years. His name is Diva. He spoke at the last meeting. And, you know, I think that's sad. I think when we want to really incentivize the right type of construction on Miami Beach, this is completely backwards the way we have it now. And so I want to go over some of the claims that are being made. So next slide, please. Now, there's one claim: creates neighborhood blight with unsold speculative homes. So, you know, many understory homes are built for families prioritizing safety and function, not speculative development. The claim contributes to inflated home prices and reduces affordability. In fact, you know, streamlining the process, the building permit process, reduces costs and timelines, make it more affordable for families to build resilient homes. Another claim: limits neighborhood notification and removes public feedback opportunity. Zoning codes still ensure compatibility and protections without requiring an unnecessary redundant DRB process. So our city staff is probably the best in the state to really monitor and handle the homes that are being proposed to being built. Next slide. Another claim: weakens public review by eliminating DRB oversight, reducing transparency and input. So streamlined administrative review will still ensure compliance with zoning codes while removing unnecessary delays for homeowners. Another claim: encourages overdevelopment of McMansions that are out of scale with neighborhoods. Understories promote resilient flood designs that are compatible with zoning regulations and community standards. I mean, the fact that the claim that we're building this is for mansions, I mean, that's so disingenuous. Okay, another claim: erases Miami Beach's architectural history by replacing older homes. Understories focus on future-proofing homes for climate challenges without sacrificing neighborhood character. And again, I want to let everyone that's watching and listening to understand this. If you are going to build a home on an elevated berm, you do not need to go to DRB. If you want to build it on an understory, you have to go through a DRB process. And the only incentive, the only benefit that you have for going through a DRB process is you get an extra 3 feet. That 3 feet is just for the understory. It doesn't mean your ceiling is going to be 3 feet higher or any room in your building, in your house is going to be 3 feet. It's just specifically for the understory to be 3 feet. And why is that? It's to make it usable. You want to be able to use it. You want to be able to put your kayak or your paddleboard on the wall or your fishing poles, and you want to be able to park your car underneath. So that's where the rubber meets the road. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I know I'm almost done, Chair. I said at the first reading that nearly half of the applicants that go to DRB have to go to another DRB meeting. And so what does that translate to? So if you're a property owner and you bought a plot of land and you want to build, and you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, and your architect is telling you this, well, you can build it on an understory. We would prefer to build it on an understory. However, if you do that, you're going to risk being caught up for 6 months, possibly a year, and I think one of the callers is going to say 5 years in a process that, you know, there's no control over, and it's completely arbitrary. So, and if you're a homeowner and you say, well, you know what, I'd rather just build it on a berm, I would get my building permits in 2-3 months, and I'm not going to have to worry about insurance costs, carry costs, taxes, et cetera, and time lost. So, you know, another issue, and this 44%, 22 were continuances, 11 were design related, and the other 11 were really because of a lack of quorum and other issues. And I mean, you know, it's hard to say that there's a streamlined process here that helps the residents who actually want to invest in the future in Miami Beach. You know, I wrote excessive delays and a cumbersome bureaucratic process discourage the adoption of resilient, high-quality designs that are critical for addressing the impacts of climate change. So again, if you're a homeowner and you want to build, you're risking either 6 months, possibly a year or more to build with an understory, as opposed to building on a berm where you don't have to go through a process where a board may not even make quorum. And PJ, you can end the slideshow. So look, I understand this is the next stop before the second reading. I'm more than happy to continue this discussion. I think there's a lot of people here to discuss. But you know, I just want to end off on this. I think it's important that we recognize incentives for a Miami Beach that can withstand these ever-increasing storms that are coming. I'm not even talking about hurricanes. I'm just simply talking about these rainstorms that are happening more and more frequently every year, and how do we plan for that? So I'm more than happy to listen to my colleagues' concerns about this and move this along.
Thank you, Commissioner Suarez, for bringing forward this important item. Before we hear from members from the committee, given the importance of this item and seeing the amount of members of the public interested in speaking on this item, I'm going to open up the public hearing. Members of the public wishing to speak on this item can raise their hand on Zoom, speak virtually, and those wishing to speak in the audience can come to the podium and speak for 2 minutes. So members of the public wishing to speak can approach the podium or raise their hand on Zoom. And you'll have 2 minutes to speak. The city attorney will keep track of the time.
2 minutes. My name is Peter Luria, 1800 West 23rd Street. I've lived on Miami Beach in the same house for over 30 years with my wife Pam, and in which we raised our family. It is an historic 1936 home that John F. Kennedy once slept in and that we'd like to preserve. I wasn't going to come here today because I recently had a bypass surgery, but I felt this is too important and I needed to be here. Yesterday I spoke with Commissioners Dominguez, Bott, and Suarez and left a message for Commissioner Fernandez, who returned it, but I didn't have a chance to connect with him. Commissioner Bott suggested I write an email to all members of this committee to explain my position, which is what I intend to do before speaking with Commissioner Suarez. In our conversation, Commissioner Suarez asked who put me up to calling him yesterday and wouldn't believe me when I told him nobody. I told him what actually happened was that several friends sent me a video from the first reading before the commission on November 20th of the proposed R5AG understory ordinance, in which Mr. Carlton mentioned that the neighbors next door to a new understory house that he's building like to swim in the Buff, and mentioned my name and my wife as well. What that had to do with this proposed ordinance, I have no idea, but it would seem to me that it would serve to support the argument against giving more height to a new understory house because that would only be more invasive to the privacy of the neighbors next door. I support the understory homes. The more homes that go, though, before the DRB, the better. The proposed ordinance is mixing up the issue. What it does is it raises the height and increases the mass of understory homes at the same time that it eliminates the DRB. The following paraphrase from the Save Miami Beach Neighborhoods newsletter. This ordinance proposed by Commissioner David Suarez would fundamentally weaken the public process for the review of new construction single-family homes that contain an understory in Miami Beach. Many of you know about the epidemic in our single-family neighborhoods. Homes are being snatched up by LLCs, by a handful of developers who profit through teardowns. Existing homes are replaced with McMansions with the intention of being flipped for maximum profit. Sadly, their business plans clash greatly with our residential single-family neighborhoods, as we see many of these projects sit unsold and become a blight on our neighborhoods, or worse, become party houses. Not only is this commercial activity erasing an important part of Miami Beach's architectural history, but has helped to create a property bubble that is leading to extreme home prices, making a family home out of reach for so many Miami Beach residents. Item 4, R5AG, which is proposed by Commissioner David Suarez and supported by the Miami Beach Planning Director, is meant to streamline the processes, but that is misleading. While the Commissioner claims that the proposal is driven by his concern regarding flooding of existing single-family homes, he fails to acknowledge that the Design Review Board process is an important step for neighborhood review of new construction. The
Thank you,
review
Mr. Loria.
process offers neighbors the opportunity to review plans and provide input and help to ensure compatibility under the zoning code.
Thank you, Mr. Luria.
Please give me
I've given you
one more
extra
minute,
time.
because I'd like to finish the thought. I came
and
here,
Just understand that if I give you the extra time, I need to give all the members of the public who
well,
are
what if I
present
asked one
here.
of my colleagues to give me some of their time?
We don't,
I
we
just
don't.
like to, I just have a very short.
I'll give you an extra 30 seconds.
Imagine the house next door being knocked down without ever receiving notification or information about what will be built. This is what will happen if R5AG is passed. How could we strip neighborhoods of the current review and input process, which helps ensure compatible new construction? The ordinance as proposed would fundamentally weaken the public process for the review of new construction single-family homes that contain understories in Miami Beach. Upon further analysis, the ordinance also contains a substantial height increase for new homes from 4 to 7 feet more than currently allowed above base flood elevation plus 5 freeboard. Don't you think the new homes are already tall enough? Well, apparently not to the speculators who are now buying up homes that do not face the open bay and try to add even more height to loom over their neighbors and have a downtown view. Look for small interior lights and canal homes to be
Thank you,
snatched
Peter.
up and supersized by this initiative goes before all without any input from the neighborhood. In conclusion, the DRB serves an important purpose. It provides for transparency, and those homes that go before it for review are more compatible with the neighborhood and better designed than those that don't. I urge this committee to vote against it, and for the residents of our city to speak up and stop this misguided initiative.
Thank you, Peter. Just to confirm, you're against this item, right? All right, okay, so to the other members who are present, we will stick to 2 minutes. If you go beyond the 2 minutes, I will stop you. I cannot allow for everyone to go beyond the 2 minutes. So please be respectful of the timer and of the time restriction out of a courtesy to your neighbors. Welcome, sir. You have 2 minutes to speak.
So I'm Pascal Nicolai. I'm the CEO of Sabal Development, which is a spec developer doing like houses.
Sorry, just 1 second. We need to keep speakers on a timer, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, developing house is we did something for buyer, for end user. And what end user wants, they want to be scared about flooding, about every like rise sea level, hurricane and stuff. So everyone in this our business wants to be elevated, you know? They want to be feel safe. And there's no speculation, there's no money to make when you raise house. Just more safety for everybody. They want to be able to when flooding is coming in Miami Beach, don't have any issues without the water goes in the house. When the insurance come to you and say, your house is flooding, so you have to pay like $50K a year to get like insurance. Or sometimes insurance they say, we don't insure. So people have to sell the house as a land values because there is no like insurance they want to cover. So I think, for me, there is no discussion here. I think what David Suarez is proposing is obvious. Is you have to be like this. You have to be able to raise the house if you want it as design purpose, and if you feel safe on it, you have to do it. So I support this what is, David Suarez says. I support fairly because we are facing this issue with builder, with clients, with everybody wants this house elevated. So thank you for bringing this on the table. I think as Miami Beach for the future, you know what Miami Beach is see for overseas? The floating city. Everybody think when you travel, I'm from France, I go travel in France, when I say I'm living in Miami, say, oh, you will live underwater. We're scared, we're like done about this. So we need to build road, house, like walking with the level of the sea, because it's gonna go up. So no matter what, here we are.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Are there members on Zoom wishing to speak, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, we have Ms. Elizabeth Latone.
Elizabeth, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to make this short. My mom is in the hospital, I just found out. But I wrote you, and I've asked that you support this item. And I've called him before. The previous speaker said something very important, and that is insurance. If we are already facing crisis levels of home pricing and affordability, if you want to see it skyrocket, this is how you get it. No insurance. These homes that are designed with understories are going to incorporate sustainable practices. They're natural ventilation, energy efficient design, and they're beneficial for the environment. As urban environments evolve, homes with understories can adapt to changing needs and lifestyles, making rigid design reviews counterproductive and restrictively burdensome on the homeowner. I'm not really sure why 3 feet is a resident's right to know issue, because it's not. And if you look at our residents' right to know, that is only 3 feet or more. So I would ask that you support this as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good luck with your mom. If there's members of
Thanks.
the public in the audience, please approach the podium. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Hi,
Welcome.
I'm Sarah Leddick, and do I need to say my address and all that, or?
You-
4469 Royal Palm Avenue, Miami
There you
Beach,
go.
Florida, and I live in Orchard Park, which is north of 41st Street, kind of right up the middle. It's not over by Pine Tree, not over by Alton, right in the middle. And I'm seeing a lot of houses go in, and they're really, believe it or not, quite attractive. There's a house around the corner from me that they just built, replaced a kind of awful house, and I'm happy to see the other one go. It has an understory, and it's a really, really attractive house. But guess what? It's part of the design, the understory. It's a parking area. It allows the cars to pull right in at street level and park, and then there's a staircase that goes up to the first story, you know, the first living story. But it is part of the design, and the whole point of eliminating design review board involvement is that now we can stick birthday cakes on top of stilts, and there's no accounting for what is holding the building up, what the understory is. And I saw the pictures that you showed of the Keys and on the West Coast and all that, and they're not very attractive houses. One of the things in Miami Beach that we are very proud of is that our designs are really elegant and gorgeous, and even the new houses are fitting in with the neighborhood. Take away the DRB's involvement with the understory, which would take away their involvement with breeze block and all the other elements that allow the understory to be compatible with the neighborhood and not just look like it's standing up on matchsticks, is the design review board's participation in the design. And that being said, I have come in here several times to design review board meetings and kind of stood up for a design that's not compatible, not attractive, and needs to be worked on. And they talk to the architect is there, and they go back to the drawing board and come back with a better design. So the DRB serves a very important purpose, not just for the demolition of the unwanted houses on the properties, but also for making sure that the design of the entire house, including what's on the ground, you know, and where the parking garage is gonna be, is compatible with the neighborhood. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for taking the time to participate in today's meeting. Are there members on Zoom, members of the public on Zoom?
Yes, there's somebody with the name Dev, D-E-V.
Dev, good afternoon. Please unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is actually Shiva Finger, and I was at the last meeting. I spoke a little bit, and I'm actually calling in from a hospital bed this time. So let that tell you how serious I think this issue is. And I am in vehement support of David's motion here for the main reason. I'll just get right to the point because I told you a lot about my story, and I think you all know that I've been through the DRB series multiple times for going on 5 years now. But it comes down to the fact that we cannot have this type of catch-22 legislation in our system. You have to raise your home above the floodplain, but now you can't build it because the DRB can't come to a consensus or doesn't have enough members present or is coming out of a pandemic, and you're just held over and held over and held over. It is so incredibly costly. It has been for me, and it's frankly not fair, and it's completely illogical. So I'm just going to get right to it and say that this is an incredible place, and the DRB doesn't have to be present to make sure beautiful homes are built across our city. There are other homes that are built that go to the DRB that are beautiful, and there's a million different ways to ensure that everybody is staying in line with the zoning and the laws. And I've been through it, and I'm trying to get my home built because I'm building it for my family. I'm not a developer. And I've been through this and through this and through this, and I just really need there to be fair legislation that allows people to move forward with the build that they have to do. And if a home, I know that there was a gentleman that spoke about, his beautiful home that is historic and Kennedy's lived in. That's wonderful. And there is a historic review board for that. But you can't tell somebody that they have to raise their home above the floodplain and they have to rebuild, and then tell somebody that they can't do it and to keep trying, come back later. Or if you have an indignant neighbor that is illogical or irrational, which I happen to have had,
Thank you,
that
Dev.
person has power over your future.
Thank you, Dev. And I think Commissioner Bond wants to ask you a question.
Dev, has your project been approved yet by the DRB?
I think we.
All right, I'll unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my project was ultimately approved after 3 sessions by the DRB. However, my architect did anything to get us through that final approval, and he just said yes to significantly lower heights than is feasible to actually build an understory home at. So now we're stuck at the point where we have an approval that we can't structurally build. So we have to come back to the DRB again and ask for more height, which is now legal because now that we've gone through it for years and years and years, the code has since changed to allow for more height, which is very reasonable. But my home was approved, way back when. We're stuck with a height that is completely unbuildable.
Does that answer
So
your
I'm
question,
still in it.
Commissioner Bond? Thank you, Dev. And best of luck to you. Hope you have nothing serious and a speedy recovery. But thank you for participating from the hospital. Is there any members of the public present in the audience? Yes. Welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi. I'm here to support Commissioner Suarez's motion. I live in Miami Beach.
If you could state your name for the record.
Luis Bosch. I live on 235 North Coconut Lane.
Thank you.
I'm a builder. I build homes for clients, and the goal when anybody's building a home, at least with me, is to make the home beautiful and resilient. And having to go through the DRB is just not something that anybody wants to go through, because you don't know if it's going to be 6 months, a year, and there's a lot of costs associated with that. Additionally, for us, when we're building a home, having an understory makes it a lot more easy to not impact the neighbors. We have much more parking, staging of materials. So I don't see what, if you're raising a home, the home's already going to be raised. What impact is there to the neighbors of utilizing the space that's under it? There's no impact. The home is going to be at the same height. So I'm in support of the motion, and I think it's very useful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. Any members of the public wishing to speak on Zoom?
We have Mr. Larry Schaefer.
Mr. Schaefer, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm calling to support this measure. I don't know about all the specific details of it, but Sharon and I are interested in building on top of our existing structure. We are in an RM1 zone, which is not I think the zones that are covered with RS under this measure. And we were wondering if it was possible to consider perhaps new legislation to handle the understory development of homes that aren't necessarily single-family homes. We have a duplex. It's a 1940 Art Deco home, and we were basically just planning for this thing to flood and then to come back later and build on top later, making the first floor an understory. But if we could get ahead of the storms and actually build on top and make our current first story an understory, that would be very much helpful for us in terms of having a sustainable long-term place to live in Miami Beach. We would like to note that some other parts of Florida are much more progressive in allowing these understories, and so we're not really asking. I don't think that David Suarez is asking for too much and asking for things that are in this measure to encourage understory development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for your participation. Any other members of the public in the audience wishing to approach the podium to speak? Good afternoon.
Hi, good
Welcome.
afternoon, members of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee. My name is Jeanette Dorfman, and I am a homeowner in the Nautilus neighborhood. I designated my home as historic because I believe in preserving the unique character of Miami Beach. I've also invested significant resources into making my home resilient to flooding and climate challenges. I'm deeply concerned about the proposed changes to understory requirements, reducing design review board oversight and increasing reducing design review board oversight and increasing allowable heights to 31 feet risk degrading the value of historic homes like mine. These changes could encourage out-of-scale development and the disruption of neighborhood harmony, and it will diminish the investments homeowners such as myself have made to protect and enhance their properties. While I support climate resistance and resilience, these proposals prioritize expedience over the thoughtful design. Without proper review, understory homes could introduce massing, private intrusions, and stormwater issues that directly affect adjacent properties and our community's quality of life. As someone who has taken personal steps to make my home both resilient and historically significant, I urge you to maintain the oversight process that protects homeowners and will preserve the integrity of our neighborhoods. Please consider the voices of residents who care deeply about Miami Beach and vote against these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Mr. Attorney, any members of the public on Zoom wishing to speak?
No one else.
Okay, other members of the public attending in person, please approach the podium. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you for the time. I brought my notes, but not my glasses, so I'm going to struggle here for a minute. But my name is Glenn Boyer. I'm a 20-year resident of Miami Beach and a homeowner and a architect by education. And I've worked as an owner's rep and as a project manager, property manager, et cetera. I've paid close attention to this sort of thing, and I do believe that the berm homes do create some of the issues that Commissioner Suarez pointed out with regard to water retention, with regard to the side yard issues, the front yard issues, and it really does create a compatibility issue with our neighborhoods. I would suggest that, you know, as someone involved in this process, we love a code that if we follow, it's sort of a guideline that, you know, we can just follow and go through the process. And I think that the city is sort of putting its finger, maybe inadvertently putting its finger on the scales and saying, okay, we recognize there are these issues, they have to be addressed. You sort of have two paths to go down, but one path will take an extra, 6 months or a year. It can be very expensive, the carry costs, the attorney's fees, et cetera, the process. And in some cases, I guess, 3 or 4 times going through the process. And I don't think that's the goal of the city when something is codified. I don't have to come in for, if I follow the rules on lot coverage, on FAR, on side yard setbacks, on front yard setbacks, on roof terrace locations within my, I don't have to come in front of a design review board because it's there in the code. And so if it's there in the code that I can build an understory, I think having that additional step is just inconsistent with the rest of the code. And since I have 15 seconds left, I would just suggest that, thinking about this today, there's this show on Netflix called The World's Most Extraordinary Homes. And there's one of them that's a block north of here that Renee Gonzalez did, which is an understory home. And there's another one that Marcio Kogan did on Pine Tree Drive. I believe it's an understory home. And I believe that aesthetically and architecturally, they're much more compatible with our neighborhoods than these homes that are built up on berms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Please approach the podium. Good afternoon, welcome. You have 2 minutes to
Thank you.
speak.
I'm Mike Tennis. I'm a resident of Miami Beach for nearly 30 years, raised 3 kids here. I work for a home builder, Purin Homes. And thank you for this moment. I'll be very quick. The gentleman that just spoke before me, brilliant. That's exactly what I would say. Essentially, the rules as they exist are an encumbrance to us building, as is probably a better solution, the understory. There are cities very near to us that have codes that this is codified in. I've built in Golden Beach. We dealt with this every home we built. There's very specific codes of how an understory is utilized, how it's designed, and it can be very simple. By having the DRB, you're placing a tremendous encumbrance on us. An extra 6 months to a year is a lot of money, a lot of resources. And the understory is a really great solution. Having grown up in Florida on the coast, Pensacola, where it's been hit by many hurricanes, this solution is really the only thing that works. That's it. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for participating in today's meeting. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you so
You have
much.
2 minutes
Daniel
to speak.
Seraldo with Miami Design Preservation League. First of all, everyone's talking about the understory, and just to dispense of that, no one's against understory. They're currently allowed. There's absolutely no, is anyone against understories? I don't think so. No one raised their hand in the room. So that's not what we're here for. There's a misnomer on the name. It's actually a height increase. And in particular, Chair, I want to point your attention to that in my very short time. There in the very back, and the planning board didn't even have time to discuss it like we asked because it was being pushed to go through to first reading. But we now have here, it says RS3 currently 24 feet with the new regulation, 28 feet flat roof, understory home. And did you notice footnote 7? Guess what? If you're RS3 and your property is over 18,000 square feet, you get another 3 feet. So instead of 24 feet, now you got 31. Wow, how'd that happen? Very interesting. What I would like to ask, if I can, is to bifurcate this issue. I don't think there's any controversy about building understories, but what we really need to refine is a maximum height in these neighborhoods. I was really shocked watching the Design Review Board hearing 2024 when a developer who didn't even own the property at the time, per the property appraiser, applied for major variances, waivers, and even pushed some of our commissioners to push it through. What I don't want ever to happen is for people to be afraid of what's going up next door to them. I want residents, whether they're billionaires or not, to live in the comfort and quality of life of their neighborhoods. These folks have decided that they need to make their millions by developing properties, but other people made their millions other ways, or just want to have a quiet life in a non-commercial single-family neighborhood. So let's bifurcate the height. I'd like to meet with the other developers in the meantime, come back with a better resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any other members of the public wishing to speak?
Hopefully the last will be the first. So my name is Agnes Gray. I am the resident at, myself and my husband, Keith Gray, we're residents at 1645 West 22nd Street. And we are actually the house that is directly located east of the new development, which actually brought myself, and this is, I'm gonna speak only about my experience, brought me to DRB meetings twice. The first meeting actually was a few years ago, and it was in our favor and in favor of myself and our neighbors, and the second meeting was not. Which, by the way, I fully accept I appreciate that, and I'm very, very grateful for the ability of speaking up. So the most important part about this particular ordinance is that it's essentially shutting down the neighbors. And believe me, I was born in a communist country. I was raised in Poland, and the part that we couldn't do is to speak freely. So therefore, I don't think there's nobody here, as it was said before, there was anybody against understory houses. Absolutely, they should be encouraged. This is the way how to build. But why this particular ordinance is saying that now the house, which is so higher than me, it's limited to 28, but it will be administratively allowed to be 31 feet or 34 sloped roof feet above me without any check and balances. The whole purpose of DRB, and I don't know, I'm speaking here as a resident, I don't know how to improve the DRB meetings and the procedures, but DRB is essentially check and balances and eyes on different projects, and removing that and delegating that only to some bureaucratic process is not the answer to create a friendly environment and a happy neighbors. And I spoke to my other neighbor, and the truth is that I want to stress it, we are not against understory, but we're against increase of the height and also removing DRB review, which would be very helpful to the
Thank
neighborhood.
you so much. Thank you for your participation. Any other members of the public? Welcome. Please state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edward Kalichis. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I recently actually went through the DRB review process. I'm a developer by trade, and I guess contrary to some popular belief, I aim my goal is to build projects that are beautiful, that add to the community, don't detract from them. So during the design process with our architect, we went through some options, and we were focusing on affordability at first, but after seeing what South Florida and Florida in general, and just really climate change has done, not just here, but all over the world, affordability was important, but sustainability wasn't something that I was willing to negotiate on. So yes, the idea of building our house on a berm was suggested, but I told our architect, listen, I think that if we want this project to not only be beautiful, but to last, it has to be done with an understory. Now, I was made aware of the process of having to go to the DRB, and thankfully for me, and unfortunately, unlike some other members that have spoken, it was a short process. I believe it was only 5-6 months from February to July, because the only thing that I was requesting as a variance or an exception was the understory. Funny enough, I like to work very closely with architects, engineers, seeing how they follow the code, law, everything that applies to building in certain municipalities. It almost became, it was funny to me, but it almost became like not a popularity contest, but there was a lot of items that were touched on that was based in subjectivity and opinions, and not based in what I saw, how I saw the way the project was designed with our engineers and our architect. And so I think that process inadvertently undermines the actual formal building approval process, wherein these projects are looked at under, Miami Beach has probably one of the strictest building codes in the United States. And I think that looking at these projects in that lens of opinion undermines that process, and it should be baked into the final permit approval process and not be a standalone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Mr. Attorney, any on Zoom?
I'll speak.
Mr. Attorney? No? Okay. Welcome.
Hi, Fred Carlton, 1800 Purdy Avenue. So I guess I'm the focus of a couple of people up here, and so I'm going to address Miss Gray since I've known her for a long time. She did tell me that one of her concerns.
Mr. Carlton, I'll just ask you, keep your comments to the dais. We don't mention members of the public by name, so
Okay.
just.
Well, my
yeah.
neighbor, I'll mention my neighbor to the east who said that she was concerned about the house that we were building for privacy reasons, that her husband's what do you call it? He swam in the naked. But then I found out later on when they came to me and said, excuse me, when there were people on the phone, you said it. And the people up here know I don't tell tales out of school. So but then I found out later that really what she wanted was for me to knock down 30 feet of my back wall so that she could have a clear view out to the bay. So, you know, people up here are just very disingenuous in what they're saying. It's really not right. Look, there were studies done for understories, and, you know, the recommendations were for resiliency were understories. That was adopted by the commission. There are all sorts of codes in place. Okay, the DRB doesn't know all the codes. The DRB is made up mostly of unprofessional people that do not, you know, have design experience. They're not architects. You know, they're realtors, they're organizers. You know, none of you would have non-experts advising you. Let's say you wouldn't have a non-expert financial expert advising you. So why should citizens have a board that is comprised of people that are not experts advising them, telling them, you know, what they like? You're the one making the investment. You hire professional people. They're trained professionals, and you have non-professional people telling these people what they like. It's absolutely absurd. None of you would do it. You know, all these homes are, a lot of these homes are consistent, or most of these homes are consistent with what's built on Miami Beach. All of this could be worked out so that, you know, the homes remain consistent. There's no reason to go before a board that costs you tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars and many, many delays.
Thank you, Fred. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Yes, Sarah, welcome. Please, I will not allow for there to be this back and forth. Everyone has an opportunity to speak, and everyone has been given an opportunity to speak. But I ask us to please maintain decorum while in the chambers. Thank you, Madam
Hi.
Chair. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah Giller Nelson. I'm the current chair of the Design Review Board, and I have been on the DRB since 2020. I wanted to begin my remarks. I'm glad that I got to speak, I think, last, because I wanted to respond to a few points that were made by other members of the public and people on the dais to clarify. The first point was Mr. Finger. I was there in November 2020.
We don't call members.
I'm sorry. I want to clarify that the person that called in that said that it has taken him over 5 years because of the DRB process to realize his home. I was on the DRB in 2020 when that home was approved. So any delays that have been caused since then is part of the permitting process, which is different than the DRB process. I'd also like to mention there seems to be a perception from a number of other people that called in to speak to support this measure that having DRB review eliminates or prevents people from being able to have understories. Again, we're all pro-resiliency. I think you made very good points. We all want resilient homes. We really like understories. It's exciting. So going to the DRB doesn't mean that people cannot make understories. The city is promoting this. It's something that is applicable. The other point was that the DRB is redundant. And I think that anybody that has gone, any sort of creative type that has gone through the DRB process realizes that this cannot be true, that the staff, the code, their role deals more with quantitative. There was another person who spoke who mentioned all of these different quantitative things that were contributed by staff, whereas what the DRB does is qualitative. We had a number of people speak about what they want as beautiful buildings and beauty. And I will say that perhaps more than any other city in our region, beauty is a really important value. Resiliency is important, but beauty is as well. Beautiful buildings are what keep the lights on at City Hall. They pay for our parks, they pay for our services. This is why people come to Miami Beach. This is what, as you've heard, residents want. This is what buyers of homes want. Sorry, can I?
Out of a courtesy to you, I'll give you a few extra
Okay,
minutes.
I really appreciate that. So I think that my main argument and my reason for coming, and I've said this over and over again, is that there are many steps in the permitting process that can be eliminated to increase efficiency, speed up development, promote resiliency, and make our community better. Let's examine the processes that are not helpful to our residents, businesses, and visitors before we eliminate the ones like the DRB that has been promoting and creating beautiful homes in our community for decades. Thank you very much, as well as the importance of the public review process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm also available. Thank you. I'm also available as the person who's been on the DRB for the longest time and has the direct experience dealing with these to answer any questions and to please allow me to be a resource to you for any questions
Thank you,
that
and
you
thank you
have.
for your
Thank you.
service on the Design Review Board.
Thank you.
It's appreciated. Any other members of the public here to speak? Seeing none in person, Mr. Attorney, any on Zoom? With that, we're going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to recognize Commissioner Dominguez and then Commissioner Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was a very good discussion on understories. I had done some digging about this as well, and understories first became allowed in Miami Beach in 2014, and then in 2018, the commissioner at the time, Alaman, brought in the design review to be part of the process. During those years, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 homes that had understories. And in 2020, Commissioner Samuelin, who was vice mayor at the time, brought in an ordinance to incorporate all of the suggestions to streamline the process that came from a consulting firm, I think it was Matrix at the time, for the DRB approval of understories and other resilient measures. Commissioner Samuelin was also the one that brought residents' right to know when he was president of Miami Beach United. And so oversight of things was very important to him. And I've had conversations with the DRB and with members of the public. I've heard from both sides of the equations. And so what I want to ensure is when a home has an understory, it is a massive structure. The neighbors deserve to know that it's what's happening next door to them. And the DRB, in my experience, from 2020 to now, we've had over 50 homes with understories. So the DRB is working. And I do understand that some developers don't like it, and there could be ways to streamline it. And that's what I'm hoping we can get from Tom Mooney and from the discussion today. How can we streamline the process so that a developer doesn't have to come or wait months? How can we make it better so that both the residents are finding out about these massive structures, the DRB is getting their chance to review it, and the developers are also not spending months and thousands of dollars in order to complete their projects?
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Director, I don't know if you wish to respond to Commissioner Dominguez's request.
We had looked at ways of streamlining the process, not just for single-family homes, but for other types of projects that had to go before the DRB and HPB when the Matrix Group did their first study. And some of the options that we had were somewhat limited, such as reducing the amount of notice that might be required. But generally speaking, the process itself is what leads to the delays because there's a certain amount of unpredictability with regard to making an application to the DRB. And so that's why for single-family homes, this was something that we felt should be reviewed at staff level because of the fact that we have very, very straightforward and detailed criteria for what single-family homes should look like in terms of their height, in terms of their setbacks, in terms of their design. And unlike commercial and multifamily projects, which have a greater impact and are more significantly experienced by the public, single-family homes are generally only experienced by the homeowner, and they're not experienced by members of the general public.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Commissioner Dominguez, I don't know if that answers your question. If there's any follow-up that you have?
Think a little bit and go on to other.
Okay, and Commissioner Suarez,
Yeah, I don't, it's okay, I mean, if time, but there was some.
Commissioner Bob wanted to speak, so I don't know if you want to hear.
There was
from
just
them.
some points that I wanted to clarify on, but I can wait my turn.
Commissioner Bob.
I would actually say that single-family homes are not only experienced by the family living in that home. They're put in the middle of a neighborhood, and everybody living in that block or adjacent to it experiences it as well. And, you know, I share the late Mark Samuelin's desire to maintain oversight in, not oversight necessarily to limit what can happen, but a discourse, a dialogue between people who are affected by something. It's something we value significantly as legislators. We build it into our ordinances to make sure that people have a right to be notified and weigh in if they want to. Now, I understand there are people who abuse that. There are grudge matches between neighbors. I'd like to find a way to eliminate that. I think that's really problematic, and that is an undue burden for homeowners, developers. You know, if you're upset because you're about to get busted for having run something illegal through somebody's yard 30 years ago, that should not hold up the design review process. I'm not supposed to ask questions I don't know answers to, but here I go. Tom, what is the height that a house can be built to if you're doing it as a berm versus as an understory home?
Currently, under the code, it would depend on the zoning district that you're in. If you're proposing currently a non-understory home in the RS1 and RS2 district, which are the much larger estate lots, like Star Island, the large waterfront estate lots, the maximum height is 28 feet for flat roofs and 31 feet for slope roofs. In the RS3 district, the maximum height is 24 feet for flat roofs and 27 feet for slope roofs, and the same holds true for the RS4 district, 24 feet, 27 feet.
So that's for berm houses.
Correct.
Okay, so nobody is disagreeing, and Commissioner Suarez, you always put together very thorough PowerPoints, but nobody is disagreeing with the fact that understory homes look to be our collective future. Nobody's saying we shouldn't have those. There is a discussion that is meritorious to be had about what is the maximum height to have an understory house as of right. There are guardrails put into place to make sure that we don't have these birthday cakes popped onto stilts the way you see throughout other parts of the coastal communities in the Southeast. That is something very important to me because that is going to undermine our architectural fabric. But from what I understand, that is not possible. So I'm not so worried about that. I will say that having more eyes on projects always makes things better. I mean, even on the planning board, we had somebody come forward with an application for a perfectly viable project, but one of their walls was the equivalent, unintended, but was the equivalent of a spite wall to their neighbors. And, you know, it wasn't our purview on the planning board to say, hey, maybe think about that a little differently, but we did anyhow. And so now that wall was provided, you know, it had texturing and, you know, some artistic merit to it, so it wasn't a complete spite wall. So here's what I might suggest as a compromise to consider. If we are allowing, and nobody has issues with berm houses being built to a certain height, why wouldn't we allow the same thing to happen with understory houses where we know that they are better for the neighborhood, the community, and ultimate resilience goals? However, if you want to have higher, better use of that understory, so that you can store your gear, you can put in bigger vehicles as parking, you can use it for usable space, then you would come to the DRB for a variance. So if you're building like for like, with the height impact being the same, then you can forego the DRB. If you want to build an understory that has a little bit more usable space in the understory portion, then you would have the opportunity to come and get that done through a DRB hearing.
Is that an amendment you're proposing to the ordinance before us today?
I think I'd like to hear some discussion, but yes.
Yes, okay, let me recognize the item sponsor. Are you amenable to that amendment? Because
So
it sounds reasonable to
I
me.
think what we should talk to the planning director, I mean, the reason why we have a 3 feet increase is to make the understory usable. Like, if you remember Diva, he says that because he didn't ask for the additional 3 feet on the understory, now his space isn't usable, and he has to go back to the DRB now and request the extra 3 feet.
So, but let's remain mindful, what is the intent of the understory? The intent of the understory is to resiliency, the safety of these homes, address issues having to do with insurability, and by having the understory, we can achieve that. And the extra height pertains to the usability of the understory, which is a non-resiliency issue. So to the point that Commissioner Bond was making, I'm going to defer to the planning director as suggested by the item sponsor. Mr. Director.
So in our experience, in the experience of my staff, the additional 3 feet for that understory becomes critical for usability purposes. And I think that if you were to maintain the same building heights, but require that any height above that, for basically the additional 3 feet go to the DRB, it would amount to all understory homes going to the DRB, because that 3 feet is something that's important in terms of the usability of that understory area.
Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Tom, if you're explaining this correctly, if we were to move forward with this amendment, it would result in no meaningful impact for single-family home construction, because I think at the end of the day, what we want to do, Mr. Chair, is incentivize a better home, and I don't think an extra 3 feet is going to make any difference in terms of massing or visual line of sight. Our planning director has said on the record that 3 feet is negligible. We are not increasing the massing. The FAR is staying exactly the same. We are just simply increasing 36 inches of the understory to make it usable. Yep. So I mean, I think we've heard enough from city staff who, by the way, they set up a very detailed plan on understories. This is not just a bunch of check boxes they go through. I mean, it goes through a strenuous staff review process, and I would really welcome our planning director to talk about that, so to give a little bit more insight to the public that's listening on the steps required for a staff level approval for an understory.
Yes, and clearly there's detailed criteria in the code, which we've adopted over time for single-family homes. But let me just ask you, Mr. Director, because it was referenced that RS3 homes currently have a height of up to 24 feet, and that this would allow a height up to 31 feet. Explain that to me, because that's not 3 feet, that is 7 feet. So I just want to understand that, and what percentage of the homes being approved are getting up to 31 feet in height?
Sure. Currently, I think it's important to look at maximum height in terms of the 4 different RS districts. We have RS1 and RS2 districts, as I mentioned, which are the much larger estate lots, and those are going to have a higher height limit simply because they're just much larger lots. Then you have RS3 lots, which are kind of a mix. You have some RS3 lots that are much that are not quite as big as RS1 and RS2 lots. Then you have RS3 lots that are as big and sometimes exceed the size of RS1 and RS2 lots. And then you have the RS4 lots, which are generally the smaller dry lots. Under the code now, the maximum building height in the RS3 district is 24 feet for flat roofs. However, under the code currently, if somebody has an understory proposal when they go to the DRB can allow up to 31 feet. So 31 feet technically is already allowed because you have to go to DRB for understory approval. What we had suggested is that the height be limited to 28 feet, but that the 3-foot increase be allowed administratively, but only for those much larger RS3 lots. In the RS4 district, it would continue to be, as proposed, 28 feet, even though currently the DRB could allow up to 31 feet.
Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the RS4, it's 28 feet for the flat, 31 for the sloped?
That's what is proposed under the ordinance.
And somebody had mentioned, I don't know if it was in the audience or not, but so berms are allowed in the city, and if they were horrible, they wouldn't be allowed. An understory that is 3 feet, which is the size of a berm, is better than a berm. So I don't see why it would be not good, not usable, because if it's better than a berm, a 3-foot understory sounds amazing. Now, for it to be usable, we've got to increase the height, but a 3-foot understory is better than a berm.
So, the reason that the 3-foot came into play was, as you may recall, when we adopted the LDR updates and the resiliency code in late 2022 and early 2023, we had suggested that there be an additional 3 feet so that the understory areas could be more usable. Up until that point, architects were struggling with trying to make that area usable because the overall maximum height doesn't change. It's measured from base flood elevation plus allowable freeboard. And even by measuring height from base flood elevation plus up to 5 feet, architects were struggling to have enough usable space in the ground understory level, yet still provide livable space in the second and third floors of the home. Actually, technically, the first and second floors of the home. Some of the things that are factored into that include roof slabs, and they also include other things such as the drainage that is required for a flat roof. One other thing that's important to point out is that when you look at bermed homes, which do not require DRB approval, the size of the berm will depend upon the overall height of the home as measured from base flood elevation plus freeboard. So in a lot of instances, a homeowner may do base flood elevation plus 2 feet, which depending on sidewalk elevation may only be a 3 to 4 foot berm. However, if a homeowner wants to do base flood elevation plus 5 feet, you could end up with a 6-foot berm. And as experienced from the sidewalk level, that would actually in some cases potentially be higher than an understory home that was limited to the heights that are being proposed.
Okay, thank you. PJ, can you put the PDF up, please, page 2? And another thing that was mentioned here, and it might have been Commissioner Bott, was how massive a structure it could be and that the neighborhood deserves to know. And in page 2 of this PDF, the next page, it shows an example of how much higher it is in a single-family neighborhood, and those neighbors deserve to know what is happening there. Go 2 more pages, please, PJ.
But let me just ask you on that, if you go back.
Yeah, PJ, go back, please.
Okay, because there, we see the homes there, but how much, I would imagine the picture in the middle is the one that has the understory, and how much of that, it looks like an extra floor, it doesn't look like an extra 3 feet, Mr. Director, because I just wanted to make sure that people, there's not a misinterpretation of what's there. It looks like an extra floor, it looks like that could be potentially an extra 10 feet, not an extra 3 feet, is that correct?
But if you look at 2 homes down, it's a 2-story home, and it's still more in line with the neighborhood than the one with the understory. I'm not saying no to understories, I'm just pointing out that neighborhoods
But I'm just
should
pointing out
know.
that this isn't the 3 feet there.
Right, there's also another floor, but there's 2-story homes in that picture, the one next door and the one next door to that. The 2 to the right are both 2-story homes, and they fit
we don't know
in
if
the
this is-
neighborhood, where the understory one doesn't.
We don't know if this is the scale.
And then two slides down, here's another example of a real picture, not a rendering, and then the homes next door. And then, as the DRB had mentioned previously, they do help with the design, and we do have professional people on there, and there is a mix of people, so if there needs to be more architects, maybe that's something we can look at as a commission for the future, but I do think that they're helpful.
Thank you. And so let me just ask this. This addresses a very important issue of having to do with resiliency in our city. There is an issue with the homes with the berms. I do believe that that they do create flooding for neighboring properties. I just don't believe it. I know it. I've seen it. I've witnessed it in my neighborhood. Over time, berms degrade. They lose their structural integrity, and they become ineffective, especially as flood patterns intensify. And rain patterns as well due to the impacts of climate change. So I think anything that we can do to move away from the berm model to the understory model, we're doing a service to our community. We've also seen case studies from FEMA that show significant cost savings to those homes that have been built with the understories. And so we do need to encourage this. And we need to be very balanced about it in how we handle the public input and the public participation. My question is there a way where we could allow for an administrative review of understories? But if something is so outrageous that, an abutting property owner, an abutting neighbor be able to appeal the administrative review, have, a 1 month window where someone could file an appeal. That way, we're not holding up homes that could be reviewed, that could be approved. If someone is really very onerously impacted, they can file an appeal and have those appeals be prioritized by the DRB. Because that way I feel we're doing something that's balanced. We're sending the message and we're communicating out there, hey, we want to move away from the berms. We want to promote this more resilient style of architecture. But we also feel that there is still a place where if you are an affected homeowner, you have an opportunity where if it really is impacting, okay, you can file an appeal. But at the same time, not have an entire, neighborhood. Because here's the thing, we all are neighbors, but if I buy a piece of property, I want to be able to design the home that I want to have. I don't want someone 3 blocks away dictating what my home is going to look like. As it is, it's expensive enough to build a home in Miami Beach. And then on top of it, bureaucracy and red tape is adding to it. And so I think we need to find the balance. How is it that we accommodate both? And just wondering, Mr. Director, how you would see something like that working, if it would be amenable to the sponsor of the item.
Something like that generally, in my experience, can be challenging because while you could post a property to notify residents, which the current ordinance requires, if you were to provide an appellate process and a neighbor avail themselves of that appellate process, then the onus would likely be on the homeowner to then have to bring an application to the design review board, and that likely would take months. Certainly, if it's the direction of the commission.
I'm sorry, the onus would be on whom, I'm sorry, to bring an application before the DRB?
The onus would likely be on the applicant to bring an application to the DRB, in which case they would have to file all of the exhibits and provide copies of the plans, and then go before the board.
But all of that is already being provided to you through an administrative review.
The administrative review is only the plans. In terms of what needs to go to the DRB, they would need to see those plans and any other exhibits that they would deem necessary to be able to make a decision on whether the home should
So what
go
other
forward.
exhibits besides plans? Because from what I understood, in an administrative review, you're looking for specific detailed criteria, design criteria that we've had codified. What is, and I need to understand this, what is the difference in material that would be reviewed by staff as opposed to the material that would be reviewed by DRB? Because I'm okay, having something administratively reviewed if you are reviewing the same material. But you're telling me now something that was not clarified previously. I'm sorry, sir, please. No, we are not disruptive in the chambers. I will not allow distractions in the chambers. If you want to be distractive, you can go outside. Thank you. Lost my train of thought. Yes. So the materials, I need to understand what is the difference in the materials for administrative review between what DRB requires as opposed to what would be required by an administrative review.
If the appellate process was set up so that the only thing that is required to be submitted to the DRB is what was provided to staff, then it would be a matter of making duplicates of that, and that would include.
Tom, I'm sorry. A review of an understory home. What is it that DRB right now is reviewing as part of an application package as opposed to what staff will review administratively?
The DRB, what would be additional that would be provided to the DRB over, say, building permit plans would be photographs of the property, context drawings, and perspectives. Those are probably the three key differences, and those typically are not required when we do an administrative permit review.
Okay, and why wouldn't you review that administratively? If we were to create, because I want us, let's say if we move, and I don't think it's the intent of the item, I think the intent of the item sponsor is to create a more efficient process, but I don't think it's the intent of the item sponsor to have a less review of, concepts and perspectives and that type of stuff. So why wouldn't staff review that? Because you guys are professionals.
We would typically require for permit review, which would include compliance with all of this criteria, site plan, a survey, a landscape plan, floor plans, detailed elevations, and to the extent that we needed more detail to ensure compliance with those plans, we would request those from the architect, and those could potentially be perspective drawings. In terms of neighborhood context drawings and photos, that's something that we could avail ourselves of by either doing a field visit or reviewing it on Google Earth or Google Maps. We wouldn't necessarily need an applicant to provide that level of detail.
Okay, because I just feel that if you're going to be approving something like this, I don't see how do you look at the full context of it without seeing these perspectives, the context drawings. I would imagine that's important. And so, I would feel much more comfortable allowing for an administrative review process if you guys are getting this information, taking this into consideration as part of your review. And then if something really is very onerous, then allowing for there to be an appeal at DRB from certain stakeholders, people who would have standing, because right now what we have is an open system. Someone could be proposing something in Orchard Park, and I can show up and I don't live in Orchard Park, and I can be telling a neighbor of Orchard Park what their home needs to look like, and stall someone's investment, and stall someone's plans for years. And I'm not even an immediately impacted neighbor. And so, if I'm the abutting neighbor, if I'm the neighbor across the street, I get that. I get, wanting to have a say because, I might be dealing with the shadows. I might be dealing with a wall. I might be dealing with someone looking over my yard. That I'm fine with as a matter of an appeal. Someone with standing making their case to the board. And that's a matter of appeal. But as of right, or not as of right, but as just a general process of doing business requiring each one of these to go through this process, I think we set us back. And so I would encourage you, to the sponsor, to to consider this, because I think it creates a balance that could be fair for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm still a little unclear about what the proposal is, but I think our planning director said that any sort of appeal process is going to be a challenge. But Mr. Chair, one thing you did touch up on was the understory process. Tom, if you can explain to the rest of our committee that the understory, if someone was to do a staff level administrative review of understories, you have created a whole system and outline in place that's separate and apart from anything to do with a house built on a berm. And it's a much more stricter, stringent process than houses built on a berm. Can you touch up on that for a minute so we can enlighten the members of the public and my colleagues?
Sure. The review of single-family homes, there's specific criteria that is used for the review of single-family homes. And this applies currently to both understory and to berm homes. And for instance, if somebody comes in with a berm home, there is specific criteria that our staff looks at in terms of the design of the home and its relationship to surrounding properties, as well as all of the technical requirements of the land development regulations, such as unit size, lot coverage, building height.
And we're already doing that now.
Yeah.
Okay.
The same would hold true for understory, in addition to what we call understory level standards. And that's a separate section of the RS regulations that is specific to understories. And it regulates things like the use of the understory area, the amount of non-air conditioned space that is required. Basically, air conditioned space is limited to things like an elevator to get you from the understory area to the first habitable floor. It gets into things like the use for parking and storage and limitations in that regard. Details such as a continuous soffit that is required. And the overall elevation of the understory. And probably the most important is the understory edge, and that regulates things like breakaway walls, open lattice work, louvers. And that's the type of criteria that sets understory homes on Miami Beach apart from what you see in the Keys and other areas that are truly just buildings placed on stilts with no thought to architecture or design. And that's why the understory homes that we've seen look like they do because of this criteria.
So one of my colleagues, Commissioner Bott, I believe, said, we don't want to see like a cake on stilts. If a cake on stilts was presented to staff, I'm assuming would say, this is not compatible with the neighborhood. You'd have to go to DRB.
Even the DRB couldn't approve that because the understory criteria requires a certain number of enclosure walls and soffits so that you don't have that cake on stilts effect.
Correct. So, and if you can explain it to me correctly, right now, houses built on berms go through a staff level review process. And I'm assuming most of the people are okay with that because we don't see a flood of complaints about houses built on berms, other than the flooding, of course. And if we apply that same, with the same staff that's doing it for berms, would be the same staff applying it for understories, we would have a uniform review process at the staff level that's already working for one type of structure.
Correct.
Berms. So, colleagues, I think, yeah, at the end of the day, we just have to realize that we're flooding. And no matter, whether you want to put your head in the sand or not, we're going to be underwater. And these 100-year storms are going to be more frequent. We're going to have a lot more storm surge. And where the rubber meets the road on this issue is that single-family homeowners, they don't want to have to go through a DRB process that is very subjective. And I understand that it can certainly enhance the project, but again, that is also very subjective. What may be beautiful to you may not be beautiful to the person applying or to the neighbor, etc. It's very subjective. And the fact that we don't have that same subjective review process for homes built on berms, it's unfair to do it for homes that are much more superior for climate change. So I think, you know, given the fact that we have a system in place already for reviews, we have a world-class staff. I mean, really best in the world, considering all the challenges that South Florida has, and particularly a barrier island. You know, I certainly feel comfortable with our planning director and his staff on reviewing these projects.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that's evident by the nature of the legislation you've presented. I'll just remind you, you know, I think this is very important. I believe in us doing anything that we can do to make our city more resilient. Because of this, I want to make sure that this item leaves this committee positioned in a way that I feel that it can receive the 5 votes that this will need to get in order to pass at the city commission. You know, and you know, I'm supportive of this item, but I think that this item could potentially get more support, hearing the feedback that we're receiving, if there could be a potential, you know, appeal process where affected stakeholders, individuals that can be defined as having standing, can be given an opportunity to appeal and have their voices heard. And so to me, that's important, that we don't go through this process and then we get to commission and we end up with a 4-3 vote. This ultimately needs to get 5 votes at the city commission. I want to recognize Commissioner Bond, who's been waiting to speak.
So I come back to the notion that arguably the desired effect here is to make more resilient communities. So is there a way to look at the numbers in aggregate and limit the total maximum height? And it is then up to the applicant to decide if they want to have that excess height in understory, or instead of having 14 feet ceilings or 20 feet ceilings, they could have 18 feet ceilings and then have more understory that's usable. What I'm trying to do is, and I love the idea of having some kind of a review process, but I also, you know, if we're not going to have DRB, having some kind of an appeal process, but that worries me that it's going to be complicated. My wish is to not take it out of DRB, but I think we want to encourage people building homes, the everyday people building homes, to make it as resilient as possible. If you're going to be building a spec house or a $50 million house or something like that, then there is, and you want the soaring floor to ceiling windows, and you want, you know, the roof garden, then I think that is a project in its totality that is meritorious of coming to the DRB, because it's not just about the extra 3 feet on the understory, it's about everything, where your walls are, where your landscaping is, what you're going to put on the roof, where you're going to put the 5 different air conditioning systems. You know, it's a bigger project. But for people building, you know, they bought a piece of property with a 1930s bungalow that is crumbling down, and you know, it's not. I'm sorry, Daniel and Sarah, because I love those too. But you know, they're not going to, because it's just not. It's not viable for them. But they're not building an enormous, you know, multi-bazillion-dollar home. But they want it to be sustainable, and we know understories are better than berms. Could we not put a total package cap, and thereby bifurcating something that is more, you know, for everyday people versus something that is a bigger project, that is the type of project that might get neighbors engaged? And if we can, what would those numbers be, and what would they look like?
Before Tom answers that, I just wanted to clarify one thing. When you said the 3 feet, is it going to go toward higher ceilings? No, the 3 feet only goes toward the understory.
No, that's not, I understand that. What I was saying is that what can we find what those numbers are in aggregate? So the total height of the project, you can divide up, instead of having 2 stories with 20-foot ceilings, you could have 2 stories with 18-foot ceilings or 17-foot ceilings, and then make the understory bigger. I don't know what those numbers are, whatever. That's why I'm asking our director of planning to see, because maybe that then alleviates the issue with the really big projects that have multiple facets to them, and the smaller projects where somebody just wants to move their family into some place that they can call home for the next 40 years without being swept away.
In my experience, the floor to ceiling heights for new construction are, in a lot of instances, more limited when you do an understory, because of the fact that you want the understory, or the homeowner wants the understory to be usable. And so a usable understory typically is anywhere from 9 to 10 feet. And sometimes it can go to 11 feet. When they do that, that will typically limit their floor to ceiling heights of the floors above to anywhere between 13 and 15 feet, depending upon the base flood elevation that they measure the house from. And so you're not talking about ginormous types of floor to ceiling heights. Ironically, the homes that don't utilize the understory and do the berm, because they start measuring the height from the top of the berm, they end up getting the higher floor to ceiling heights, even though the total height of the home might be slightly under an understory. When you take into consideration the height of the berm, and you're reviewing these cases side by side, oftentimes when viewed from the sidewalk, a home with a berm can be at almost the same height as an understory home.
Commissioner Suarez.
I mean, look, I certainly can understand, you know, some of the concerns raised by some of the residents. You know, I trust me, you know, I'll be the first one to admit, you know, the reason I got into politics is because I wasn't notified about a hotel being built next to me, and that's why I'm here.
So I'm gonna support your item, and I would encourage you. I want to make sure that for the intent of what you have before us, I'm sorry.
I have a very technical question
but
about-
public comment is closed.
Is
You
there
were
an-
given extra time out of a courtesy, and so I can't. I'm not going to
Well,
reopen public comment.
okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's more a technical thing
Thank
specifically
you.
about the ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Giller.
Okay.
I would encourage you, you know, I would encourage you to allow for there to be an appeal process, so that we can allow a certain level of community involvement because I want to make sure that, you know, we can get to commission, have a 4-3 vote or a 5. I want to make sure that this is in a position that can actually move forward. And so that's, I don't want us to waste our time in the process.
Yeah, I totally understand. I want this to be a 7-0 vote. You know, I think because it makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, as legislators, we need to plan for the future. And if we lived in Amalfi, okay, where they have very strict standards on building, but they don't have the challenges that we have as far as climate change. You know, they don't have sea level rise, they don't have hurricanes, they don't have rainstorms that happen out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're flooded, and then you see tarpon on Alton Road. You know, they don't have that problem. We do, unfortunately, being a man-made barrier island. And I think what we need to do is incentivize this type of construction. And the moment we start putting a roadblock here and a roadblock there, or an appeal, that is going to de-incentivize. And that's the whole point of moving this forward. And so the fact that you don't have that appeal process for berms, you know, it's counterintuitive. You know, because like if someone wanted to build Cinderella's castle next door and they wanted to do
for both.
Huh?
That's required for both.
If I could finish my thought, if someone wanted to do that, they couldn't be approved. It would go to staff. Staff would be like, "Look, this is Cinderella's castle. You can't build this here. It's not in style with the neighborhood. Send it to the DRB." And if that was the case for an understory, like what we just talked about with a cake on top of stilts, that wouldn't be approved at staff level. That would definitely have to go back to well, I don't even think DRB would approve that, but there are certain guidelines and checks and balances at the staff level, and I personally feel comfortable with our staff overseeing that as it relates to these single-family homes, because at the end of the day, they're doing it for houses built on berms, and it's working. So why wouldn't it work for a much better, superior structure?
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Dominguez, and we're going to call the question, and, let the process end up however it ends up.
Well, I wonder if the
The
process is
vote at the end of
working.
the day. I mean, the vote at the end of the day.
I wonder if the process is working on berms, because everyone's saying how horrible berms are. So I think that the thing that we need to look at is how do we eliminate berms so that we don't offer them and we do only understories. But some questions that I had is that the understory doesn't specify, the ordinance doesn't specify the height of the understory. And if it did, I missed it. And how to guarantee that extra height will actually be used for the understory and not some other part of the structure.
We could make that clarification in the code, but in order for the understory to be usable, they're going to need at least 8 to 9 feet. And so in our experience, that is built into it, but we could certainly tweak the ordinance to mandate a minimum floor-to-ceiling height that would ensure that that extra height is in the understory. And that wouldn't affect the title. That's something that we could add before second reading.
Commissioner Bott.
Again, going back to the idea that we are trying to build resiliency and not, that there are two types of projects, right? There are the more modest understory homes and then the more elaborate. So I would be interested in doing something that specifies a minimum understory height of 8 to 9 feet, and then anything that wants a greater understory height exceeding the maximum, whatever the maximum height would be, would have to go to DRB. Again, I'm trying to get back to how do we get more resilient homes across the board, but the things that are going to be really large and really impactful have the opportunity to be heard and resolved.
Would that work, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly tweak this to mandate a minimum understory height to clarify that additional height, and then to specify what the heights of the either 1 or 2 floors above would be. And by specifying a minimum of 8 to 9 feet, that would still allow for a very usable first and second floor above that.
And then anything above that has to go to DRB.
I think that's a very fair compromise, Commissioner Suarez. Is that something you would be willing to accept as an amendment to your item?
So just to clarify, a minimum height of the understory, and they still get the additional 3 feet, as it depends on the district that they're in.
Correct.
Because it will go to the understory.
Correct.
Correct. It would only go to the understory.
To make the understories usable.
He said that understories would be, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
The chair. You just mentioned that an understory to be usable needed 8 or 9 feet, so that's that.
A minimum. In most instances, people want, in our experience, 9 to 10 feet.
But if they want to get to 9 or 10 feet, then they have to go to DRB.
Or they would have to reduce the floor-to-ceiling height of the
yes.
levels above. So if the overall height exceeded a certain cap, then they would have to go to DRB. But to the extent they wanted to, say, provide a 9-foot understory and then have slightly shorter tall floor-to-ceiling heights on the 2 habitable levels, that might be an option. If they're looking for something much bigger that would go above the cap, then perhaps that's what would trigger the DRB.
So just so I understand correctly, we'd set a minimum height for the understory. You still have, well, it depends on the district. I think 31 was the highest one to play with an
Right.
understory. That was with the 3 feet variance, but that 3 feet is the majority of it is going toward the understory.
Correct.
Yeah, that's fine, because at the end of the day, we want to build a more resilient understory, right? Because if there's a storm surge, for example, if you're on one of the islands and there's a 10-foot storm surge, you want to be able to withstand that. The last thing I want to do is have an understory that's only 4 feet tall for my kids to play in.
And to your point, The goal is, the height is not to get better views from the second floor. The goal is to have a usable understory where we're encouraging the use of understories. It's still to a space that is usable to the homeowner. So giving them that opportunity without necessarily increasing the mass and the size of the home that is built above it.
Yeah, I think we need to really understand, through the chair, understand what the maximum total height is, because the goal is to not have it be what's currently proposed. The goal is to keep it as low as possible, but give them the maximum area to play with internally. So those 3 feet, they can put them to the understory, and then they take it from someplace internal. But it's not like it just keeps adding up.
I want to just make sure we're on the
Okay,
same page.
We're gonna go through the chair. I'm not gonna have a back and forth like this, so I want Tom to respond to us.
The actual overall height will depend upon what your cap is. So for instance, under the code now, in the RS 1 district, you can go to 28 feet. And the DRB can allow up to 31 feet. 31 feet generally will allow the most flexibility with regard to a very usable understory and usable, habitable first floor and second floor. To the extent somebody wanted to do something higher on the understory and subtract an amount from the habitable floors above to stay at or below the cap that is set, that's something that people can certainly do. And I think that is where you're heading, Commissioner Bott, where you want to establish a minimum height for the understory for resiliency purposes, and then there would be a cap on the overall height, and how a homeowner would want to have more height in addition to the minimum required for the understory, or would want to have additional height on the floors of the 2 habitable floors.
Then they go to DRB.
Yeah, if they wanted to exceed that cap, they would have to go to the DRB.
Through the chair, just to clarify that.
Yes, and then we really need to bring this in because soon it'll be 2 hours that we've been on one item. And so after this, I want there to be a motion if there's an amendment that's accepted by the sponsor, and then we're closing out this item.
So the berm houses could go up to 28 feet
Depending on the zoning district,
for RS1 and 2, for instance.
for RS1 and 2, a berm home is 28 feet above base flood elevation plus allowable freeboard.
And
Freeboard can go up to 5 feet.
and so the understory house would be 3 feet above that.
It would be an additional 3 feet.
You have a motion you'd like to make?
Through the chair.
Yes.
Just so we're clear, I think Commissioner Bott proposed a minimum height of the understory. I'm okay with that. I would like to keep the additional 3 feet incentive for building this home, because you're not going to, if you don't add that 3 feet toward the understory and you're taking it away, let's say you have the maximum of 28 feet, and then you're forced to build an understory with a certain height, and your floor to ceilings go down, and then you're like, well, that's not really an incentive for me. I want to have tall ceilings, or that's just my design. Then I'm going to go to berms, and then it kind of defeats the purpose. Again, I think I'm okay with a minimum understory requirement that makes it usable and storm surge protective, if you will. But I think the 3 feet incentive, depending on the district or the zone, makes the project sense. So I'll make a motion to require a minimum understory height. And you can come back to us, I think, before second reading, as an amendment to this item.
I have a question.
I-
Really quick.
It's quick, and then we're calling the vote.
Because I really want to get there. I am not supportive of the 3 feet incentive, because for me, that would be go to DRB if you want to have that 3 feet incentive. But an amendment to the item might be to trigger notice to the neighbors so that the neighbors know what's coming. I remember at the first land use meeting, I had asked if we could do the same thing to berms, and the reaction from the city staff was like, that would be massive. So I'm not saying for everybody, but to the understories, because they are such taller projects.
Yeah, and I think the goal is allow these understories to be usable. So the 3 feet incentive should be for the understories. It shouldn't necessarily be for the other parts of the homes, which I don't think is being translated with what you're saying. Is that what the sponsor was saying?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
The 3 feet is only for the understory.
For the understories. Okay. Yeah. So, David, you recognize.
Just a thought in terms of how this ends up with a calculation. If the height is basically measured off your design base flood elevation plus freeboard, right? So if we say that if you get the 3 feet incentive, it has to go in the understory. It's going to basically lift the base flood elevation that was originally designed on 3 feet higher. Height is measured from there. So what I'm thinking is, if you keep the current heights as required, let's just take the example of the 31 foot with a sloped roof, right? 31 feet is always going to be from base flood elevation plus your freeboard. So now if you include the 3 feet, that's the incentive to have a usable understory, that pushes that finished floor up 3 feet. You still measure 31 feet from where that ends up, and you end up with the same thing, but you don't have to change the height.
So you're saying measuring from BFE plus freeboard and the 3 feet, and then you calculate from there?
Correct, and then you calculate the height. But you don't have to change it, because it's still going to be 31 feet from wherever that point is. And you're going to have the 3 feet is going to be in the understory.
All right, Tom, could you explain that to us?
Yes, what I was just clarifying is that, for instance, in the RS3 district, just as an example, what is proposed as a maximum height, flat roof for an understory home is 28 feet. And that includes the additional 3 feet. If you have a property that exceeds 18,000 square feet, which is basically an estate lot that's similar to RS1 and RS2, then you could go to that height of 31 feet. And that is measured from base flood elevation plus allowable freeboard. So I think what Commissioner Suarez was suggesting is that the ordinance be amended to clarify that the additional 3 feet, which is already included in either the 28 feet for RS3 or 31 feet for RS1 and 2, be utilized in the understory area.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Exactly.
I'm fine with that. Are we all okay with it? Do we still have concerns with that?
Are the neighbors notified?
The, through the chair, if I may, under the draft ordinance, there's a requirement for a posting prior to the issuance of a building permit, so that neighbors can see what is potentially going to be proposed, and to the extent that they want to review the plans or reach out to the neighbor, there will be contact information for the property owner and the design team on the posting, so that they may reach out to them before the permit is issued.
Okay, so the item's been moved by Commissioner Suarez as amended. I'll second it if there's no other discussion. Any other questions or discussions? No? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the item, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
All right,
I'm not loving it.
I'm sorry?
I'm not loving it.
All right, so is that?
That's a nay.
That's a nay, okay, so a 2-2 is, it moves forward with what type of recommendation?
Well, the item was an amendment to the item that is currently at commission. So 822 means there's an unfavorable recommendation for the amendment.
Okay, so for the amendment, okay, so do you need a motion on the unamended item, or?
I mean, that item is still currently in front of the commission. It's going to second reading. The sponsor could, on his own, bring an amendment at second reading if he wishes to incorporate what this committee has rejected.
I could do that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand here. Mr. Attorney, tell me what's your explanation again?
There was a motion to amend the ordinance that is currently going to second reading at commission. That motion failed. There wasn't support for it. So the ordinance as in its current form is still at commission for second reading.
Okay, yes, understood. Okay, all right, very well. Is there anything else we need to do then with this item today?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, we're all good moving forward from this?
It just seems, it seems disappointing that we spent 2 hours, and it seemed like we, at least Commissioner Bott was there. I mean, Commissioner, look, I think, we spent 2 hours. It would be a real shame if that just got wasted on that, I think.
We took a vote. I mean, we had the opportunities to amend this item, and and by the way, I foresee this will die at commission. I'm just being very transparent. I know how to count to 5, and I've been experienced enough in this to know that in its current form, I don't want you to spin your wheels or waste your time. I have no expectation of this passing at commission.
Okay.
So, all right, we're moving forward from this item. We're going to item number 2. Commissioner Suarez, you have item number 2.
Yeah. Again, to streamline, just to make it quick, to streamline the process for a lot of our land use committee meetings, I propose that we have a consent agenda similar to what we have at commission. A lot of these issues can be resolved as part of like a homework for some of our land use boards. And if there is an issue, one of the members can easily pull it from consent. So I'd like to explore what my colleagues think about that.
All right. Mr. Director, do land use boards currently have the ability to have a consent agenda if they so choose?
Yes, as we noted in the memo, the land use boards have implemented a consent type of agenda in the past. It has been somewhat challenging because all the items that go before our land use boards are technically public hearings. So in order for an item to be considered as a consent item, there's 3 conditions that have to be met. One is that the applicant has to agree to all the conditions set forth in the draft development order. Number 2, there is no public comment on the proposal. And number 3, all members of the land use board have to agree to forego a presentation. And so the land use boards could implement this right now if they so choose.
How would it work for the public hearing? Because that is one of the key things with these hearings before the land use boards is the public's ability to be heard. And applicants before land use boards, applications before land use boards, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, these are all public hearing items, right? Okay. How would it happen then? The public hearing would be all lumped in one public hearing for all the consent items rather than the public hearings being heard individually?
What we've done in the past is when we've had very lengthy agendas, we've reached out to applicants to see who agrees with the conditions in the draft order. And for those applicants that have agreed to the conditions, we would then create a consent agenda at the beginning of the agenda. And then the chair would call each one. And if there was no public comment, and if the members of the board all agreed that they did not need a presentation, then the item could be moved and seconded and approved. If there was public comment, or if one of the members wanted to hear a presentation, then it would be moved off the consent agenda.
Okay, so there's the ability already to do this. It sounds like there are times when you guys are doing this already. And would this mandate it on the committees, or would this, in essence, just allow them to have this if there is the opportunity or the will?
If there was an amendment to the LDRs, it would basically codify a practice that the committee already has in practice. But again, any codification would have to be subject to these three conditions because these are all public hearings.
All right, so it's happening. All right, so, I don't have an issue with this. It creates efficiency. Any other comments from the dais? No other comments from the dais. Members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Daniel, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Commissioner. Sorry
Your
for
mic is
my
not on.
excitement earlier. I actually want Daniel Serrato with Miami Design Preservation League. I think this is a good idea. We've suggested this previously. Consent agendas for certain types of items could be helpful. Even honestly, with the discussion we just had, I just was thinking maybe certain housing items or other things that are sort of minimal could be possibly done via consent. Sometimes, as an example, there's a single family homeowner that comes and there's not really much, like at HP board, there's not that much controversy, and it could possibly be approved on consent and make it easier. So if the sponsor is interested, maybe we could work together and figure out some of these types of projects that can help save time and streamline the process. Thank you.
Sponsor, would you be interested in working with Daniel Serraldo and MDPL?
Always.
Okay, great. So I look forward to that. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Mr. Attorney, any members of the public via Zoom?
No, sir.
No, okay. Seeing no other comments, is there a motion on the item? I'll second the item. Can we show this adopted by, before we vote, Mr. Director? Yes.
I just need to know what action you are moving. Do you want us to draft an LDR amendment for referral to the planning board, or is this something that?
Was this a dual referral?
No, this is not a dual
Okay,
referral.
so then it needs to come back, and let's keep, why don't we bring back a potential LDR amendment that we could recommend to the city commission for then referral to the
Okay,
planning board?
so we'll bring this back to the land use committee with the draft ordinance.
Can we show that done by acclamation? Yes, okay. Let's move on to item number 3. Mr. Director, let's introduce the item.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 3 is a discuss future programming of the West Lots.
Commissioner David Suarez. This is your item. You're welcome to introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think the West lots have been underutilized, and I wanted to just get some ideas on this commission on what we could potentially do with these lots. There's a lot of talk about doing nothing. There's a lot of talk about maybe potentially making them into at least a park. So if you want to take your dog to the park, you don't have to worry about him running out to Collins Avenue and getting, hurt, or your children. So, Mr. Rebar, if you want to have any ideas that you prepared, or specifically maybe a park in the area.
Yeah, you're sure I could offer some suggestions. Now, as you probably know, there's 8 lots, and right now 1 has been designated to the Parks Department. That's where the skate park is, and where the future skate park or pump track expansion will take place as part of the GOB. And adjacent to that, to the east, is North Beach Oceanside Park. And there's been a lot of talk, but the rest of those lots are not part of the Parks Department. So there's all these conversations from an economic development standpoint, what is the best use of it? to meet our parking needs, to meet other city needs. Now, of course, you want to, if the policy decision was to go ahead and assign another lot or 2 or 3 to the Parks Department, we have some ideas. It would be smaller scale things. We're not going to fit a full-size soccer field on those lots. We're not going to fit a full-size baseball field, but there are a lot of other things that can be done. During different master planning, there was a talk about having active recreation there, because you have such a large, beautiful, passive park than the beach to the east.
How many lots are just grass? It's just under, not 8. But is there 8 total, or?
8 total.
That's underutilized, or?
8 total. The total stretches, I believe in your packet here, you'll have 8, and then 7 and 8 remain vacant. 2, 5, and 6 are used for municipal parking lots.
Okay.
Then I mentioned the skate park. You have the old log cabin site. You have,
So how many just have grass on it, vacant?
I believe it's 3.5.
3.5.
I believe.
Okay.
But there's different things happening.
And you have one of them that's vacant?
That's the half. We have the skate park on the half, and then we have the other half for expansion. And we have the botanical garden and composting site up there. So there's some temporary uses taking place there as well. It's so even if it's vacant, it might have a temporary use other than the parking.
Got it.
So to get back into what can we do, what things we can do, or things that we talk about a lot here: pickleball, paddle, courts, small-sided soccer. Those types of things, like a 5-on-5, 3-on-3 soccer. Probably U12 and under soccer, 11 and under, because we have to worry about, we have Collins Avenue there. We'd have to have a netting. You got to keep the ball in there. You need room for spectators. So we have to be careful with how large of a field we go. But there's opportunities for sure.
I mean, I think like a soccer field there on one of those 3.5 lots would be excellent added benefit to that community of North Beach. I mean, where's the nearest soccer field in North Beach?
From there, we have Normandy. We have a multi-use field at Normandy Isle. We have a multi-use field at Fairway. We also have joint use of Biscayne Beach Elementary in the evening. But a true soccer only field, they're multi-use. We don't have much. We're not.
There's 2 in Flamingo Park, or just 1, right? That's very popular.
Flamingo Park, we have 2 areas. We have the football soccer stadium, and then we have what we call the soccer cage, which is closest to City Hall here on Meridian. That would be the northeast corner.
Okay. I don't know how my colleagues would feel about. I think I'd love a soccer field there, at least on the other half, perhaps, of the lot that's owned by Parks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me just, make some comments here. I very strongly feel that anything that we do on the west lots, and this is a motion I made a while back at the Finance Committee under the previous composition, that it be community driven. That we reach out to the community, and I don't know if you remember this, John, that we reach out to the community, that we have a meeting, that we canvass the North Beach community. We have a lot of community there that they are our residents, they are our constituents, but they need to be engaged. And they won't engage us in the way that we are accustomed to, but that we need to reach out, we need to knock on their doors, we need to speak to them in their language, we need to ask them, do you have children? Do you have elderly? What is it that's missing? What is the need of the community? What would you like to see here? And I would love a soccer field. I think that's great. But I would love for it to be the desire of the community. And so I think that outreach is very important. The other thing I would say is, I'll tell you what I don't want to see there. I don't want to see commercial activity. I don't want us to be leasing out these lots. I don't want to see any concrete going in there. I feel that this should be almost a continuation of the open space park across the street, and this should almost be ancillary to that. And so from my perspective, you know, we should be expanding the recreational space, using this as recreational space, and anything that's placed there ultimately, you know, through specific public engagement. The way we've done the open house at the South Shore Community Center, the way that Commissioner Bott is organizing one for the house up that we purchased up in North Beach. I think we kind of need to do a reverse open house where we reach out to those neighbors, we go to their doors, we ask them, what is it that you'd like to see here? And use that as guidance for us. Commissioner Dominguez and then Commissioner Bott.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing this item up. I absolutely love it, and I completely agree. What the chair is saying is 100% true. We need to get community input to see what it is they like there, because maybe pickleball is so popular here, but the people up there only want soccer. Some of the lots, the ones that are paved and are currently parking, should remain that way, because we have the North Beach parking item that's going to be in effect next year, and I think those lots are going to be a lot fuller than we've seen them in the past. And in another one of the lots, I think it might be 6, is the kiddie campus. Is that where it is?
You said
John?
The cat one?
The kitty camp?
The cat house?
I believe that's 3.
3? Okay, hold on, let me see, on 82nd. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that stays as it is. And I know that Ocean Rescue is using one of the lots also.
Number 1.
There may be talks that they move into the house on Collins, or maybe not.
And also, there is a future project within North Beach Oceanside Park that would provide space for the county beach operations, Parks and Rec operations, and Ocean Rescue.
Okay.
And then there is that conversation, which I heard, which I'm not a part of, with the house on Collins.
Okay, but all in all, this is a great item, very exciting, I really like it.
Thank you, and I'm going to recognize Commissioner Bott.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that my colleagues have said so far. Community input is going to be critical. We can't just dictate what goes in there. These parcels are sacrosanct to North Beach, and we need to treat them accordingly. I would be interested also in hearing from community members about other uses that are recreational in a different way. You know, arts and learning spaces, perhaps, community resources in different ways, not permanent structures. I don't want to see concrete poured there either, but, you know, having kind of funky pop-up container villages perhaps that meet a need that may not be addressed. So I would be open to that as well.
If I may, all for the public outreach chair, we spoke about it, and then we were triple booked that night. We had to postpone the meeting. Then summer came. Here we are. Any guardrails you want to put on me and staff for the public outreach? Are we talking about 2 lots? Is this going to be just a blank page that we have this conversation? Because we're talking about we'd like to keep parking. We're hearing that we really don't want concrete. I don't know how that affects padel or pickleball, because that would be an improved surface. Anything more you want to, any more direction you want to give me, or just really let's just go out to the community and get some input?
Make sure we protect the kiddie campus.
Okay.
Yeah. But
or find a different home for them.
Yeah.
That they can't be just booted out.
Yeah. But Commissioner Suarez, I think this is great because, you know, this is a great asset that we have. It's just sitting there.
Well,
and the public is being deprived of the opportunity from having improvements there. It's not just improvement to the lots. The improvements there are to the improvement of the quality of life of the residents of that area. And, you know, this is some of our most culturally diverse, but also some of our most, you know, limited income individuals that are living there. And we could be providing them with amenities that can enhance their quality of life. And so I love the direction you're going with this. It's consistent with the vision that I have as well. And I love to see what the community would say. I don't think we need, you know, we've said this in the past, let's reach out to the community. We don't need consultants to reach out to the community. This is what we do. We are public servants. We are government. We should be able to reach out to the community, get their feedback without needs to hire consultants or anything like that. Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you. How about we send out a survey, an open-ended survey? We don't put any, I mean, maybe we could, multiple choice and other, but how about we send a survey out to the North Beach zip code and ask, hey, what would you like to see on here?
We could start with something like that and then go on to an open house, set up some tents and.
I think, I love the idea of the survey. I love the idea about hosting, let's host a picnic, a community picnic at one of the lots. And let's find a day where we can actually do outreach. Let's go out to the neighbors of these areas. Maybe we can engage some of our schools, to help us with this. Let's go out to some of these areas, knock on doors of people because let's be real, the people who are gonna come to respond to a survey, which is great, I think we should do that, but those are the people who we already engage with and they're already in our mailing list. The people who are gonna find out about a community event to come and give us their input are also the people who we already engage with. But there's more to the community that's there. And again, because of language barriers, or they may have 2 or 3 jobs, they might not come out to these things, but those lots are there for them. And I think we need to actively go knock on their doors and ask them how they see this being activated to fill whatever voids they feel may be existing there. Are we cool with that, with those 3 approaches?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does someone want, so do we want to bring this back before the land use committee? How much time do you anticipate you'll need to do this type of outreach? Let's say 3 months?
Yeah, right now, the next few weeks, we're talking about the December holidays.
Right, so-
We have a lot of blue zones, things happening in January, so we could do the survey during that, but I'm thinking February, then hit the ground. Survey January, hit the ground, February, March, come back.
So come back to March or April, do we want to say maybe?
Yeah.
Because that way we have 3 months, maybe 1 for the survey, 1 for the event,
That's better.
1 for outreach,
April,
door
come
to
back.
door, and then we come back in April with substantive feedback that we can consider.
Sometimes March is busy in the city too.
Yes, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. Is that good, colleagues?
Yeah, if I might, just, John, the Blue Zones thing is the beginning of February, not January.
Oh, okay,
The big presentation that
True,
week.
okay.
Okay.
My bad, thank you for the correction.
All right. I have to say, by the way, all of you who are working on the blue zones, I just want to commend you. I was in Costa Rica for Robert's birthday, and they are so proud that they are part of Blue Zones and how they promote it and how it contributes to their quality of life. And I'm so proud that our city's engaged with it. So, yeah.
Well, if I might, through the chair,
Yes.
since you teed that up, I have to give a major shout out to Cindy Casanova, who I thought this would be like a little project that she might help us organize. And it is an enormous undertaking. It's a second full-time job. And so
She's turning blue.
she is turning blue. She is true blue zone. So major props. Raquel, she needs a big raise. Just saying.
We'll second that. Thank you, Commissioner. Members of the public wishing to speak on this item, seeing none in the chambers. Mr. Attorney, are there any on Zoom?
I see Mr. Larry Schaefer and Ms. Elizabeth Latone.
Mr. Schaefer, welcome. Please unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes to speak on this item.
Good afternoon. I wanted to bring up an idea that I had for the former log cabin parcel on the West Lots. My idea is a temporary artist village built from container structures. The North Beach Yard was going to be built from containers and things like food trucks that were temporary. My proposal is to build something like the North Beach Yard, but with a greater focus on living and working space for artists. There would be some commercial space, basically areas so that artists can sell their works, and maybe a cafe, coffee shop, and so on, but not as much commercial use as the North Beach Yard got approved years ago. And I think there would be a strong emphasis on providing affordable housing for artists that would be interested in living in a dedicated artist community on the West Lots. My proposal would include container homes, container studios for working artists, and other temporary structures that could be removed if the city wanted to develop the West Lots or wanted to replace the project with a park or anything else. So we're not talking about putting concrete block structures here. We're talking about something that could be built effectively and efficiently, and then removed later if the needs of the city and the neighborhood change. I know there was a recent discussion of bead vendors and artists vending on the beach. I think that we'd be glad to have all of those artists and vendors inside our artist village selling whatever it is that they like that's considered art. And I think that this is something that we could bring to North Beach, which would actually make us more competitive with some hipper areas like Wynwood, where artists have helped to revitalize an entire area which used to be former industrial space. I don't think that all of the west lots should be covered by an artist village, maybe one west lot, maybe 1.5. And I'd like to see if my neighbors, this is the first time I really shared this idea with others, so interested to see if my neighbors also like this idea as well. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Schaefer. That's the benefit of having community meetings where we can all voice our ideas and hear from each other. Commissioner Dominguez, and then I'll go back to public comments.
Just quickly, there is an artist village made out of containers in Las Vegas, and so if the city wants to look at a template on how they do it, artists live in the containers. There's also some that are cafes, and it's a very unique project in a section of town.
Thank you. Let's proceed with the next speaker, Mr. Attorney.
Miss Elizabeth Latone.
Welcome, Elizabeth. Please unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, good afternoon again. Larry, I like your idea. I think the community, and I appreciate you all reaching out to us because these are our lots, and you know, there's been so many controversies over the years. I think if we could all have community input, it would really be appreciated, and we'd be able to make something work. But one thing I would ask is that before anything is done, can y'all please clean them up? I don't know how. I mean, they are complete junk. They are waiting on a hurricane to just toss rebar and rusted things. They're unsightly. It contributes to the decline in the area. There are vines growing up. Some of the old sheeting that's covering the fence. I'm not quite sure why, you know, the rest of the beach has these beautiful areas, and we've got 8 lots that can be beautiful, and we can utilize them right now. But the city is using them. They're covered. They need cleaning up and maintaining, and that should be first. And I just appreciate if y'all could take that into consideration.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any other members of the public on Zoom wishing to speak on this item, Mr. Attorney?
There are none.
Okay, and I'd just like to confirm with staff, through the GeoBond projects, I believe in the 2018 GeoBond, there was $5 million have been allocated to spur investments in green space and open park areas on the west lots. Are those funds still there?
Yes, they are, Mr. Chair. There's $1 million as part of tranche 1, and then the other $4 million would come as part of tranche 2.
Okay, all right, and we still have the funding for the log cabin, to reconstruct the log cabin?
Yes, we do, and we actually, I know we have an item at commission for an update that hasn't occurred yet, but log cabin, we're already securing a consultant to begin that design.
Consultant, a consultant?
To design the new log cabin that looks like the old log cabin.
Okay, what is occurring with the current log cabin?
It's in store, all the components are in storage.
Okay, and so we're gonna use the pieces of the old log cabin to design and build a new log cabin? Is this what we're doing?
Simplistically, yes.
Okay,
That's the
I like
idea.
simple answers, yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. I don't know if that's the best use of those dollars, but, all right, so I guess the point is, there is funding available if we do go out to the community. When we do go out to the community and we get feedback, we have GOB dollars available today to improve these west lots.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. All right. Any action that is needed on this item?
I believe the motion was to continue this to the April 2025 meeting to allow for the outreach.
Okay, perfect.
By acclamation.
Perfect, thank you. We'll continue item number 4 to the next meeting, and let's introduce item number 5. Mr. Director, let's read item number 5 into the record.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 5 is an ordinance to create FAR height and setback incentives for non-transient residential uses for properties fronting 6th Street in the CPS 2 zoning district.
Commissioner Suarez.
I'm just going to withdraw the item. I don't want to waste any more time.
You sure you want to withdraw the item?
Yeah, and no one here is going to be in support of it, so I don't want to waste any more time.
Okay. All right. Item number 6, Commissioner Bott, this is your item.
Yeah, so I will let Jose do most of the heavy lifting here, but this is to address the issue that we have with both delivery trucks and ride-share vehicles stopping, in the middle of the street when we don't have loading zones available to them or designated drop-off or pickup spots, and really snarling traffic. You see it on Collins down here in South Beach. You see it on Indian Creek heading south where traffic is snarled because you've got an UPS truck that doesn't pull into the building. So there are a couple of different aspects of this, and I wanted to get some information from the city about what we've been doing, what we can do better, and to take the two elements of it separately, the loading zones for the commercial vehicles and the pickup, rideshare, pickup and drop-off points.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, Jose Gonzalez, Transportation Director and Interim Parking Director. So I will start with the freight loading zone, the topic of freight loading zone. So about 10 years ago, the city passed legislation that allowed the creation of on-street parking spaces dedicated for freight loading and unloading. And we call those freight loading zones, or FLZs. Currently, so this was 10 years ago when the program started. At this time, we have about 107 FLZs located throughout the city. Most of them are located in either South Beach or North Beach. And FLZ is comprised of several parking spaces. It's not just one. So the 107 FLZs actually consume almost 400 on-street parking spaces in our city. So these FLZs are in effect for certain times of the day, usually about 30 minutes, and they're shared by the different purveyors that have to apply and be issued a permit in order to be able to park in that FLZ. The parking department strictly enforces FLZs. We have a FLZ detail, if you will, that consists about 3 to 5 parking enforcement specialists that go throughout the city and look for FLZ violations. Something that we also do very periodically is look at our FLZs, where they're located, their size, their usage, or utilization, to determine if any tweaks need to be made. We work with the purveyors one-on-one. We've worked recently with Amazon, with UPS, to try to address their concerns and their requests. Some of these companies rack up quite a number of violations, of citations. So we work with them to try to address their needs and to really ensure that the program is working effectively and the FLZ spaces are used for their intended purposes. So there's 2 types of violations that can occur related to an FLZ. It could be a situation where a vehicle is parked in the FLZ space that is not authorized to be there. In those cases, a citation is issued, and the amount of the citation is $74. That's $74. And then there are other cases where there are trucks that are just blocking a travel lane, they're blocking traffic flow, or the public right-of-way. In those cases, we issue a citation of a higher amount. It's $124, and it's issued for obstructing traffic. And then in addition, we also issue a right-of-way fine in the amount of $500, and that's for the first offense, a $500 fine. there is an issue that at least has been brought to my attention with regard to those right-of-way fines. Some of them do not have much legal standing and they're being dismissed. And it's a little glitch in the code that we may need to take care of and just, clean up so we can work with our city attorney's office to try to clean that up so that those right-of-way violations that we're issuing to trucks that are blocking travel lanes can have some more legal standing. And in terms of the number of citations that we've issued, in the memo, we included a small table that compares fiscal year 23 with last fiscal year 24. And what we see is we see an uptick in the number of FLZ citations issued from 7,241 last or fiscal year 23 to 9,461 citations issued last fiscal year. And in terms of right-of-way violations issued, there were 767 issued in fiscal year 23 and 1,562, so more than double the amount in fiscal year 24. As I mentioned, we're always looking for ways of maximizing the utilization of our FLZs for their intended purpose. One of the I think innovative strategies that we're going to be looking at in the coming months is to better manage our curbs. There are technologies out there that use automation to just more efficiently manage our very limited curb space through the use of cameras and LPRs and different technologies that can more efficiently enforce if someone is parked where they're not supposed to be parked in an FLZ, curbside FLZ space, for example. There are other cities that have this technology already. It's out there, and I think it's incumbent upon us to look towards those innovative solutions to try to enforce more efficiently. And if you'd like, we can pause here and talk about FLZs or goes to the ride share aspect.
So I'm very eager to hear you come back, and maybe we can continue this so that you can come back and give us an update on those different technologies that other cities are using. But one of the things that's really a problem is beyond the FLZs and whether or not people are abusing them is when trucks just park in the middle of a travel lane. And what are we doing to, we know when it happens, we know where it happens. It's rush hour that we feel the impact. If it's the middle of the afternoon, nobody's there, it's not as big of a deal. But I traverse that corridor going north, from north to south all the time. And traffic is always bottled up in the same couple of blocks because there's always a delivery truck. If we know that's the pattern, what can we do, whether it's working with the delivery trucks and making sure they pull into the buildings or enforce, have police officers out there writing tickets and violations. I know we have 4 people who are doing just this specifically in the freight loading zones, but this is a little bit different. And so could we not target these locations and work to try to alleviate the traffic snarls that they cause? And how would we do that?
Absolutely, Commissioner, and we do that. It becomes a cat and mouse game. Our enforcement officers are out there. They may enforce. 10 minutes later, the same driver may be doing the same thing a few blocks down. I mean, we encountered that all the time. As a matter of fact, recently there was a case where one driver was cited multiple times. So in that case, we did reach out to the company that driver works for because that's just unacceptable. We're trying to change behavior, and there's got to be some sort of penalty. But if these drivers are just ignoring them, that's an issue. So by working one-on-one with these companies, we've been doing that, as I mentioned, with UPS, Amazon, and FedEx as well.
And why can't the drivers pull into the buildings?
Well, sometimes they physically can't because the clearance isn't there in their porte-cochere, in the building's porte-cochere. There's a variety of reasons. Sometimes the building just doesn't allow them to, even though they could be accommodated. And this happens in a lot of the older buildings that don't have and it happens in new buildings as well that don't have their loading, a dedicated loading unloading area, and it needs to happen from the right of way. And then we try to work with these companies to, of course, we're not gonna have these loading zones on every block, but we try to strategically locate them in a way where it makes sense for the drivers. They may need to pull out their dolly and go a few blocks to make their deliveries. But, you know, it's really a case-by-case basis, and it happens all throughout the city. We also were considering doing a workshop of sorts with the industry, like an industry workshop, just to really raise awareness on this issue, because it is, we've seen, you know, an uptick in the amount of illegal activity or just illegally blocking travel lanes. So just trying to, I remember there was one that was done years ago in this room with the industry, and just, you know, share with them our rules, our regulations, and ask them to be good partners. And if I could call on Albert, Assistant Director Albert, if you'd like to add anything.
Good afternoon, Alberto Ventura, Assistant Parking Director. We try to always meet with the purveyors, with their management teams, to advise them on what's going on, try to help them help us help them. Because at the end of the day, then they come back not knowing that they owe us $100,000 in fines, and they find out months later. So we always try to meet with them to see how we can help them, hear them out. If they ask us for additional freight loading zones, we look at the area, and if we can accommodate them, we go ahead and accommodate them.
Do we, how does parking and transportation work with the police in monitoring this?
You want to speak to that?
Again, we have a crew of parking enforcement officers that we ask every day to go out to different zones.
That's part of parking, that's not
Yes.
police.
Police also, we allocate some funds for them to assist us with those duties as well.
And are we getting a good bang for our buck on those funds?
Well, lately, the numbers are low. It's something that we'll have to meet with PD and see where is it that they're sending the officers and what else we can do.
How much money do we pay, allocate for police department enforcement?
I believe $100,000 a year. We first allocate $50,000, and then if they come back before the end of the year to ask for more, then we proceed to give them the additional $50,000.
And do we have tracking of how many violations that has netted us? I mean, would
Yes.
we be better served by hiring 2 more PES in the parking department instead?
It would be a possibility that we could.
That's something we're looking at.
So can you come back to us with that as well when you come back?
Absolutely. There's actually also a very similar item on the Finance and Economic Resiliency Committee agenda about parking enforcement, and this particular item of, you know, the police efforts, the supplemental efforts, and the tow trucks following the parking enforcement officers, and we have some stats. They're just not part of this, they weren't part of this item, but we'll be happy to come back and share those as well.
Commissioner, I fully agree from where you're coming from. I think given the declining performance from the partnership between police and parking, that perhaps it could be better to consider reallocating that $100,000 to hire the additional parking enforcement specialist that can be more dedicated, more focused. So happy to continue this item to the next month, and hopefully we'll have a more comprehensive enforcement program for the FLZs and the alley zones for staff to present at the next meeting.
So then, if you want to switch over to rideshare.
I'll jump over to rideshare just very briefly in the interest of time. So during this Art Week, for the first time, we actually partnered with Uber, and we created spaces, some of our passenger loading zones that were underutilized spaces in front of hotels, for example. We created a handful of those, and Uber was able to geofence those spaces on their platform. so that, the locations included the Convention Center, right, on Convention Center Drive between 18th and 19th Street, the Good Time Hotel, and the One Hotel as well. Those three locations, we wanted to start with a small number and then expand, the pilot. We'll be meeting with Uber to go over the stats. We were monitoring those locations just because of all the gridlock. So potentially under those extreme, gridlock conditions, the pilot is not going to be as effective as during just normal, day-to-day. But Uber has done this with other cities and it's worked very well. The way it works is when somebody wants to request a ride, if you're in next to one of those geofence zones, it will tell you where to go to get picked up by Uber or Lyft. We can also potentially expand the program to Lyft as well. That had never been done before. It was the first time that we did it. And again, it was during Art Week. So a good test case, probably worst case scenario as well. But we hope to do more of that in partnership with Uber.
And you're meeting with them this week, if I
Yes.
recall correctly.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so I would love it to be expanded to Lyft as well. And the other thing I'd like to contemplate is the flex spaces that we have for taxi cabs. If we could consider, and I don't know if this is within our purview, but consider co-designating them flex spaces for taxi cabs and also rideshare pickup drop-off zones.
Absolutely. There's actually, from the last commission meeting, a resolution that directs us to work with the county on that. The county regulates taxi cab service and operations, but we'll be working with them to see what opportunities there are for that flex.
The rideshare. And I know they're competing economic interests, but if there's a way to kind of capture them and put them into that geocached location template that you're testing out, that would be great.
Yes.
So through the chair, I'd like to make a motion to continue this. I mean, do you need until February since it's the holidays to get this done, or when do you think you'd be ready for January?
There's a January meeting?
Is there January?
Is it?
I think it's the 16th. January 16th is our January meeting.
We could come back with an update
Okay.
for the
Then
16th.
make a motion to continue it to January 16th.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Perfect. Thank you. We show that by acclamation. We didn't open up the floor to public comment, but is there members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person, there's one on Zoom.
Yes, we have Mr. Wayne on Zoom.
Wayne, welcome.
Happy holidays, ladies and gentlemen. Wayne from South of Fifth, how are you? I really like Tanya's suggestions and ideas. They were pretty much right on. The cab services are a dinosaur industry, and the faster we get those spots to rideshare or other utilization would be in the best interest of Miami Beach. Additionally, it's a catch-22 on parking regulations. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, the city administration, or I should say the commission, did away with, I think, everybody in parking. And these guys were really good. I mean, they were out there hustling, and they moved them to other divisions thanks to one or two commissioners who fought for their jobs. But we lack parking people. I like the idea of technology. I'm a little concerned that getting a ticket while I'm standing in a no parking zone, I don't know if there's like a time frame that you could stand without being impacted by a fine. Additionally, I'm very worried about not so much the trucks, they don't get in my way so much, but the buses. We lack turnoff areas for buses on Alton Road and other main thoroughfares. It comes to mind almost continuously. I'm stuck behind a bus that's parked. It's 11th and Alton. The turn for Whole Foods from the north on the west side of the street is consistently stopped for buses at that station right in front of Whole Foods on Alton, and there's no turnover. So that blocks traffic for, couple of minutes. So that's what I think about the traffic of Miami Beach and what we could do with the spaces more effectively. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you for your participation. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Mr. Attorney? Thank you. With that, we can show this item being continued to the January 16th City Land Use Committee meeting. And colleagues, my co-sponsors are not here for items 7 and 8. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue those as well to the January 16th City Commission meeting. With that,
Land Use Committee.
Land Use Committee. I'm so sorry. Land Use Committee meeting. With that, is there any other? Sorry, which item are you here to speak on? On which item? Okay. Okay. If please reach out to us. I'm happy to meet. I'm happy to meet with you. But we allow the public to speak on items once they're before us. So with that, is there any other business before us for the good of the order? With no other businesses, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Oh,
No, I was just going to say
Commissioner
thank you for chairing all year. You've been terrific. And thank you to the city administration for all of your hard work in coming before us. Thanks to the residents. Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays.
Yes,
I
Colin.
echo what
Happy
our
holidays.
colleague just said. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, and I'd be remiss not to recognize the fabulous work of our planning director, Thomas Mooney, of our assistant city manager, David Martinez, and of our chief deputy city attorney, Nick Kalergis, who doesn't join us today, but our city attorney, Rick Dopico, who leads the city. So thank you all for your hard work and to the community for always participating. Thank you.